call this meeting to order. It's 7:31. And start off with the roll call vote, please. I'm sorry, roll call attendance.
Okay, Doug Shepherd,
Here.
Bart Kahn,
Here.
Casey Kelly. Here. Carol Lewandowski.
Here.
TJ McLaughlin. Here. Cam Merlo. Here. Sandy Petrosky. Here.
All right, we have a quorum. First thing I'd like to do is talk about the agenda. I don't know what to do with that. It seems to have a life of its own.
Donna, do you know how to operate this thing?
All right. If it doesn't work, we'll pull plug, and then we'll be fine. Okay, so the first thing we have is the agenda in front of us, and I would like to make a couple additions to the agenda. Just some things that I think we need to talk about. And so I would like to approve the agenda with the additions of 4 items. The first one would be 8D, which would be a schedule to complete the draft zoning ordinance and get to the public hearing. And we'd like to talk about that after we get through the 3 sections on the zoning ordinance tonight. Then under 9, item 9, reports of commissioners and committees, I'd like to talk about training and a syllabus discussion. This is for some training for planning commission members. And then under item 11, I'd like to talk about 2 things under reports and announcements. Item A would be the annual report of the planning commission to the township board and where we stand in that activity. And then item B is I'd just like to touch briefly on the township's master plan and the 5-year requirement to review it and what that means to our workload through the year. Okay. And so I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda with those changes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. We're good with the agenda. Item 4, public comment. Mr. Horton.
Bob Horton, 4235 Shoreview, Hamburg. I own a anchor bolt and I also own property over in
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I own a place on Salem Road and also Chubb Road. I sent something in under correspondence, and it's in regards to an interpretation on the ordinance.
Yes, okay, yeah.
And that was it. I just wondered.
Okay, and it was, if you'd like, we can,
That would only take a minute.
I'm sorry?
That would probably only take a half a minute.
Okay. I understand. We'll get to that when we go through the draft of the zoning ordinance, and we'll after we get through the 3 sections that we have scheduled, then we'll talk about your comments there, which relate to Article 2. Okay. Any other public comment? No. All right, we're done with public comment. Correspondence. We have the planning and zoning news for February 2013 that's come in. And I'm not sure about this to whom it may concern letter, if that was a letter to the planning commission.
It was a letter addressed to the planning commission on a project that you had already taken a look at.
Okay, and so I think all the planning commissioners have this.
Everyone
Right,
had it in the file.
it's correspondence from a resident on Dixboro Road and expresses some opinions related to the
St. Mary's Coptic Church.
the St. Mary's Church. And so we have that and I've read through it. And then, of course, Mr. Horton offered us some information this evening, and that's all we have for correspondence. So we're done with item 5, and that moves us on to item 8, as we have no public hearings or new business items for the evening. So item 8 is review of the draft zoning ordinance. And if I remember, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Nanny and Mr. Pennington, but as I remember it, we had a portion of Article 40 that we had not gone through that we wanted to prioritize, and then I think with changes and revisions and stuff, we had to go back to some related items.
There was, we haven't dealt basically with the agricultural, the early part, agricultural residential parts
Okay.
of Article 40 yet, and so we certainly need to do that. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the industrial language, that the revisions we provided to you at our last meeting. This is, there was an underlying strikeout section on outdoor storage and junkyards. We were asked to put together some changes based on comments from Mr. Horton and others in the industrial area.
Will that be brief?
Well,
Because I want to make sure we don't do anything that gets in the way of the rural discussion.
well, basically, what I was going to suggest, we received,
Yes,
Okay.
everyone should have a letter from Mr.
Okay.
Samhat
Yeah,
that responds to this changes, so it may be something you want to take a look at.
and so actually my suggestion would be to take a look at that letter. It's dated March 13th. It's written to Gary Whitaker and also to the planning commissioners.
From Mr. Samhat?
For Mr. Samhat. What I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and go through it, because actually he offers some very good suggestions. And there's just a couple of items that I wanted to kind of run by you as planning commission and see if you're comfortable
Okay.
with the change. It's just as we go to, we can just start at the bottom there of the first page where it says item 1A. The first change, item 1 has two subsections, and the first language change there, subsection A, is just a typo, and that's we'll make that correction. In item B, 1B, we're talking about requirement that what item 1B was supposed to be was a requirement that the area in front of the principal building out to the street would not have any outdoor storage. The discussion previously was the planning commission was comfortable with outdoor storage in the front yard, as long as basically left the area clear that's directly between the building and the road, that would not have storage in it. And so 1B was supposed to do that. 1B was not worded very well, and I concur with the attorney's suggestion that it needs a change. As I read it from his perspective, he's absolutely right that it's a little too vague yet.
All right, now, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right information. So, I just pulled up the February 25th draft.
Right, and this is on page 40-41.
Okay.
Outdoor storage general.
And he references subparagraph 4, and when I look at
Well, that's on the,
subparagraph 4, there was a strike through, and now when I go to the next page, there's a revised subparagraph 4.
well, we're not actually to 4 yet, though. Before, on the first page of his letter, right here at the bottom of the first page, he has a comment about subparagraph 1.
Page 40-41.
Yep.
In item 4, now what I have here shows item 4 is,
But we're not on 4 yet. This first item here, in his letter, on the very first page here, it says item 1A. That's actually referring to paragraph 1.
okay,
So we'll get to 4 in just a moment, but we're not quite there yet.
yep,
The issue is this item 1B. The planning commission asks that we allow for outdoor storage in the front yard, but to keep the area that's physically between the building and the street clear of outdoor storage. That'd be an area where parking would be. It'd be an area where basically, from the street you can see the nearest principal building on the property. And that was what 1B was intended to say, but I agree with the attorney that we were not clear enough. And so what I just wrote down a change to it essentially that addresses what you had asked for, because you'd asked that that area stay clear.
Mr. Shepherd, that's
Yes.
not what we agreed to last meeting, and I'm pretty sure that the planning commission remembers that we agreed that there could be storage in the front yard area, just as long as you have your green belt.
Your landscape strip and your transition buffer.
Okay, no, I recall that discussion. Now,
What he's saying is something totally different now.
I'm just, like I said, I'm just going by my notes from what we discussed. Now, like I said, this is a policy decision. If you are comfortable with.
I understand what the suggestion is. Okay, and what I want to ask is, when we say in item 1, in the main paragraph, we say, no storage shall be permitted with any required parking or loading spaces. So, and then we've gone on to say, then we had the discussion, and I remember the discussion very clearly that we felt that if we maintain the transition area, that outside storage in the front wouldn't necessarily need to be prohibited, okay? And then I'm just as a point of interpretation though, if a facility was set up where the required parking, because the size of the facility and stuff has parking spaces, if those spaces were only in the front, right, and say they were a portion of the front, they couldn't store materials where they are maintaining a required parking area, but outside of that, right, because there's just a minimum size, it could look like one large parking area, but if it, let's say it has a capacity of 30 vehicles, because it's greater than the minimum is only 10, then potentially the area for the 20 vehicles could be used for storage.
Right.
That's the way you would interpret this.
If we simply allow parking or storage within the front yard, other than with the landscape strip and transition area. So that essentially what's suggested here would be to eliminate B. I mean, B would not be necessary if we simply allow it in the front yard, except in the landscape strip in the parking area, as it says in the first paragraph of item 1 there. You have a question though, Mr. Chairman? You have a question down the way there.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, just like to understand why would we consider restricting where they can put up buildings? What's the basis behind saying not in front of the building, between the building and the road or anything like that?
Well, that came out of our discussion last time, and it's a policy decision of the township. We had, when we drafted this, we actually had it prohibited in the front, storage and prohibited in the front yard in the future, but.
Why would one want to do that?
Oh,
Why would one want to restrict that?
Well, it's essentially, it allows visibility of the building, it creates opportunities for a little higher level character to the area. Those are the key items, I think, to it. It also creates breaks along the way in terms of storage. You don't just have a wall of outdoor storage along the front of the property. You have at least an area where the storage is not visible or is back behind. But this was, like I said, this was in my notes from our last meeting, that you wanted to have that break. It is a policy decision of the planning commission. We don't have to do that in any stretch at all. We can simply allow outdoor storage in the front yard, with the limitations that are set otherwise.
Excuse me.
Any other thoughts related to this? Ms. Petrosky?
If I understand it correctly, it's just prohibited in front of the building, correct, to the outside edges of the area that would still be considered what the front yard is across the building, that there would be able to be storage in those areas?
That was the intent of what we were trying to draft. Right?
Okay. I just picture something like a landscape supply, in which we do have one on Chubb Road. If they're allowed to put mulch in that in front of the building, you could potentially inhibit the view of their business. So I think that's something to be considered too, if we're allowing it. to be put directly in front of the building.
Chasing down a rabbit hole. Guys, this is chasing down a rabbit hole. Someone could make the building 10 foot wide as you see it from the street and say, there you go. Now I've met all your requirements and
That is
it
true.
can be done. Someone could argue, what's the front of the building? You know, is it the front where the front door is? Is the front what faces the road address?
The front would be considered, no matter which way you face your building on the property, the front would be established by the road right away.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right, it could be a very small building.
Mhm.
And it
It
could
could be a very
an
narrow
odd
building. It
situation.
could be 10 foot wide and 300 feet long and be the principal building.
Yes, it could.
Mhm.
But certainly, as I said, if the plan commission would prefer to simply leave this for an issue for site plan review, and you know, we have the language in here that says they have to provide a landscape strip. They have, if they're adjacent to residences or something else that requires a transition buffer, they do have to provide that. But then otherwise, outdoor storage would be allowed within the setbacks.
Did you have a question?
No, I was just letting you know that Mr. Horton was letting you know.
Oh. Okay, I can't hear him, so it's not disrupting the exit. I'll ask another question, and that is that this section 40.503, does that apply only to general industrial?
It applies in the industrial districts, both of them. The standards would apply to any outdoor storage that is allowed in the zoning ordinance.
That's only us.
But it's basically the two industrial districts.
Okay, and where in the cases where industrial abuts less intense uses, we're always gonna have side yard screening?
You're right. When, as this ordinance is drafted, when it abuts the rural districts, the agricultural district, or residential districts, or existing residences, they have to provide that transition buffer. So there'd be an area that would be landscaped or screened and set aside for that.
I know how, I think I'm amenable to the point of discussion, but I don't know how the rest of the people here feel. Would anybody like to voice a concern related to this? Ms. Merlo looks like she's,
No, not a concern, just a clarification.
Okay.
So the attorney is saying that no storage in the front is acceptable, and they're saying that's not what we agreed to,
Well,
right?
the attorney has a point. The language we put in here can be interpreted two different ways. And as I've read it, based on what he was, from the perspective he was bringing to it, he's absolutely right that we create problems. And so we need to revise the language to make sure it's clear. If we're going to keep this requirement that there be no storage between the building and the street, we'll revise it to make it absolutely clear. The other policy choice is really to simply say, let's let that go, and we'll simply allow storage in the front yard area, as long as it's outside of that landscape strip and transition buffer.
And isn't that what we agreed to at the beginning?
Well, that's,
Yes.
that was a discussion at our last meeting. This
And that doesn't
discussion
mean
came up to
that-
have the building area open, and so that's how this language got in here. There was a request that we provide language that we keep the area.
That was your request.
But as I said, if the planning commission feels otherwise, we can simply
Nobody
take it.
requested that. That was not, none of the planning commissioners, all these people were here last time. And we had an hour discussion on this. Item A that you put in here and item B under 1, none of that was anything that they suggested. They totally agreed with us. Now, we come back here again, and once again, you put this crap back in here again.
That's why we're here.
And they know it, so don't look at me like I'm crazy. They were here and they know.
Mr. Chair, I apologize if I have misinterpreted what was given to us. It's not my intent to add anything the planning commission doesn't want in here. And so I want to make that absolutely clear. If I've made a mistake, we will absolutely just simply change it and correct the language.
well, my notes are inconclusive from back then, so I don't remember the exact point. But I'm not ducking, I'm just,
No, I know.
I'm just speaking honestly here,
And
rather
you
than
knew
pretending
when
one way or the
you
other.
knew exactly when I said what we agreed to. And now we come back again, and it's always, oh, we'll change it, we made a mistake, we'll change that language again. It's always, we'll change that, and he puts it back in again, and again, and again, and again.
Since 1981, 2001, excuse me.
How much property does he own in the township?
Right.
Also, what if there wasn't a building there?
Okay,
That's the same
you-
thing.
You've made your point, and everybody here's trying to digest it right now. I don't think you need to,
No, I'm not, it's the thing that I sent you. What if there wasn't a building there, where could you could store right up the line? So later on, I want to build a building, do I move, then what?
We're just trying to get this straight. I'm not trying to say that Mr. Nanny put this in on purpose. We go through a lot of information, and when you guys came in, we discussed it, it's just something we just want to get clear again. I know it's at the top of your minds because you live it every single day, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
And, I mean, that's how we got all this worked out, so we just want to make sure that we're clear, that's all it is. There's no ill intent, and, we certainly appreciate your patience and understanding.
In the last ordinance, we had this all cut and dry.
Right, I don't think we need to go in that. I'm just trying to clarify to keep the heat down so we can get the focus back on this. I just want it to be clarified, not rehashed since 1981.
No, it's also.
well,
Okay, I'm done.
Ms.
All right, can we go to,
Ms. Petrowski.
can we go to A first, okay, before we get B?
Mhm.
Okay, A has within a solid, I'm sure you wanted,
Right, we're
delete one of
we're
those,
taking
okay?
that.
And B is, again, the way it states, it says to me that they cannot store anything in the front area from lot line to lot line.
That
Is
was-
that correct? Is that what this says?
That was not the intent, and that's what I'm saying.
But that is what this says,
Right,
isn't it?
and that's why we need to fix it, or remove it. All right, and the attorney was correct that it can be interpreted the way it was not intended, so. Anytime it's not clear, we want to make sure it's clear.
He's proposed a change.
And I
To
guess
be-
it's up to this body to determine if that language is what you would like to see.
His-
I understand that.
The thing with his change is actually, it's not even, I would say that we simply should delete D, because the ground is covered in the paragraph above. There's no, we don't need to put the change he's suggesting is simply repeating what's in the first paragraph of item 1. So my suggestion would be that we either
Okay, so if we
Just
agree
delete
with
clarify it or
it,
delete it.
I can clarify this. If we agree with the intent that was stated here in the attorney's letter under B, then your recommendation would be to strike paragraph B under 1.
That's correct.
And I'm okay with that personally.
Just please clarify
We have a consensus
what we end up with.
that that's a good change to me.
Okay. Turning to page 2 of his letter, and this will move much more quickly because he does make some good suggestions, basically clarifying language. For item 4, the revised language of item 4, we would concur with the suggestion that he made. It doesn't change the intent, but it makes the intent more clear.
Clarifies it.
Yeah, and so that's item, under B, the language for item 4, we would agree with that. His letter, item C, referring to paragraph 5, we would also concur with that. That's adding mulch, gravel, stone, and concrete.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, that's just inadvertent that they're not there.
Right. Item D discusses the height of materials stored above a perimeter fence. And this was one of those notes that we discussed going back to the old ordinance language, which required a fence and said that materials couldn't be above it. As the attorney mentions, and it has been discussed here previously, we have in our industrial district materials are routinely stored well above the fence, if there was one, and they have to be. I mean, we're talking about piles of mulch or piles of crushed concrete or other materials. So the question is, his suggestion is to move this requirement so that it only applies where the storage is near residences and rural districts and things. So where that is the case, they would have to keep the material under the height of the perimeter fence. I have no objection to that if the planning commission does. So if they're not near those things, then they could store as tall as orders would allow.
How would that be impacted if there were rezoning or something were to change?
Well, anytime you have,
Like, say they were already established and something next to them changes.
anytime you have a lawfully established use and something else moves in next door, it's essentially grandfathered. It becomes a legal non-conformity status. They're allowed to continue.
What's our maximum building height in the general industrial area? 40 feet? 50?
40.
I'm just trying to get a sense of perspective here. Material stored height versus,
You can't find material.
We're talking about 45 feet in the light industrial, 50 feet in the general industrial.
okay.
That allows, that's a tall pile of material. That's a building height.
Right, and what's, so,
Now, if, for our, maybe something to consider that we just simply remove this requirement. In our general industrial district, we have primarily activities that do store those kinds of materials that would routinely be above the height of any perimeter fence.
I mean, when you consider the practical limitations on how high you can store material, and the fact that buildings can be 50 feet, right? What would prevent somebody from, on a very large portion, storing a pile of material 100 feet high? I mean, because you could do it, right? I mean, I know where we have a 600-foot high pile,
Not in Salem.
right?
I don't think you can do it in
A
Salem.
landfill.
Help me out here, guys. Just,
Well, the landfill is 250 foot high, or something like that, isn't it?
No, so,
When it gets done.
Comment in hand down
yes, Mr. King.
I'm reading this gentleman's paragraph D here, and I haven't gone back to the actual document though. Permitted to be stored to not exceed the height of any perimeter wall, fence, or berm. The minimum height of the fence is 7 feet. Is it anticipated that the materials as listed in the subsection lists amount will quite often exceed 7 feet height of the mound? I'm not understanding what he's saying is not even logical. If you want to go higher in your pile of material, you got to build a higher fence.
Yes.
Well, there is a practical aspect to a fence that it becomes practically difficult to put up a fence that's 40 feet high, for example.
I agree.
So, I mean, that's really the issue is should, and this is again a policy item for the planning commission to consider whether it's a problem in the township that material will be higher than the 7 or 8 foot fence around it. Now, we can change this line. We could require, for example, that material be stored no higher than the zoning ordinance allows for the district, 45 or 50 feet. And so we do put at least a top limitation on it that way.
I'll ask the similar question as I did last time. What's the purpose behind this?
Well, this is essentially what these kinds of requirements are related to is character, visual character of the area. The intent is that outdoor storage is allowed, but that it should not be highly visible to the neighbors and to the surrounding road rights of way. That's usually why these kinds of restrictions are put on.
Okay, but,
I'm willing to restrict
Yes.
my piles to my neighbor, the dump. I will keep it lower than that.
And that is a good point, that we are, I mean, this is an industrial district, and that, of course, is adjacent to the landfill, and it may be perfectly reasonable to simply strike this provision.
well, personally think the only concern we have is when we're abutting residential districts or uses and not in general industrial to general industrial.
I think if you were to consider anything that goes to, I'll say, a lesser zoned
Yes.
area, it should be more along the lines of like the foliage and things we require along the front line, not necessarily a fence. 'Cause I tell you, I'd rather look at 40-foot northern pines than a 40-foot, you know, site restricting fence. You know, something along those lines.
Okay.
I think something,
I think that would be much more in character. And
something similar to what the attorney's note suggests, right, where he says, but perhaps in our own language, is what I believe is appropriate, where it says, where it's adjacent to any rural districts, residential or existing residential uses, the storage area shall be screened along the property line adjacent to those districts as the condition, right? And then it talks about, per the methods of screening, which are called out in the other area, and then any fence or opaque item needs to be really subject to site plan review, right? When you're putting site fences up. So then you get into the whole discussion of what's adequate screening and such.
We'll make that change, and we'll follow that direction. That brings us then to E, and actually E, F, and G are all, I think, are valid adjustments, and so we would suggest that we go ahead and make those changes. I think item F, he's suggesting that we add 2 items to the land use table. This is one of those cases where outdoor storage general is intended to be general. I mean, it covers all of this ground. I have no objection, though, to adding these specific items in to, for the comfort of the folks in that district.
Industrial research and laboratory uses.
What are you suggesting? We have.
Okay, I have to look at the table, I'm sorry.
What he's suggesting is under the land use table, we have the category called outdoor storage general. And he's essentially suggesting that we simply add 2 more categories with these specific types of outdoor storage and list them as permitted in the districts. I think the intent is just for comfort that these activities are allowed.
Right, but then those would only be listed as permitted uses in the general industrial or the light industrial and general industrial districts, or are we talking all of them?
Well, right now, we have outdoor storage. We have outdoor storage,
I mean, I understand the inclusion as a line item, but now that we've added the line item, where are the permitted?
right now, we see outdoor storage as a conditional use in the light industrial and permitted use in the general industrial. And my suggestion would be simply follow that with these 2 additional categories.
I mean, that makes sense to me, but I want everyone else on board. I mean, maybe I've gone too quick here. What the suggestion is that outdoor storage of tractors, trailers, construction equipment, farming machinery, and similar items would be called out as a special line item under other uses, which is on, I guess it's on page 20-9, right? Or it's in the section,
It's actually
it's actually on 20-8.
20-8.
Okay, so it would be a new line item in there, and then the recommendation, not the recommendation, but the proposal as I see it is to permit that storage in light industrial, general industrial, and have it, and I suppose it's also that way on farming property, right?
Well, actually, we don't have outdoor storage.
We don't, oh, because it's other rules, right, okay. But I agree with you that those should be permitted uses in light industrial and general industrial. And I'd like to see the draft that way, when we clean it up. I think we're getting acknowledgement here that that's a good deal. So that's the way we want to look at it.
And the last item then in his letter on page 3.
what's the, let me ask, when it comes to a gravel train vehicle, what's the difference between storage and parking? Outdoor storage and outdoor parking, what's the definition? What's the difference between those? One's registered and insured, the other one's not?
Well, I think either way, the industrial districts, if they have those kinds of vehicles, it would be covered under the outdoor storage requirements. On page 3, the last item in Sheldon's letter, referred to section 319, that we have made a note to delete that. We didn't include that in the sort of revision here, but that, what he was asked us, what he said we would delete, we have marked as deleted, and will be shown that way in the next step. That was a right-of-way requirements. We had in the ordinance, this was carried over from our current ordinance, language that set out the planned rights-of-way for various roads in the township. And that really is covered, that ground is covered by the County Road Commission plans and also our master plan, so there's no need to have it in the ordinance.
Okay. I'll take the question.
There was one thing that I didn't hear addressed in page 1, above section, the first item section, the front yard setbacks. We were talking closer to 50 from the road right away. That would give you 83 from the center of the road at the last meeting. I don't know if you were planning on changing there.
First paragraph.
Page
Yeah, I
1.
didn't quite follow what you said. Somebody else heard, maybe you can tell me.
Page 1 of the Donald Sam has revised things that weren't
Oh.
included.
Up in the front of his letter?
Yeah, just this, where it says, at the last planning commission meeting, and then it goes on to say that with the setbacks, we were gonna make them smaller. I don't know if you guys recall that, John? You were, you said no
Oh, I
problem,
understand.
because we were going from center of the road on the old 2001 ordinance, and now we're gonna go from the right of way. So we had spoken about that, and you were gonna change it to 50 from the, I think it's 85, or I think you
My
had-
recollection was it was 65 feet, was what we agreed on.
Yeah, that's the note I have here, is to change the front yard setbacks in both industrial districts to 65 feet
From the right of way?
from the right of way.
From the right of way,
And that's gonna be changed from the, I think it's
85 right now.
85.
It's 85, so you are gonna change.
I have that, yeah, but it's just
So it's
65, not 50.
65, okay.
Which section calls that out?
That's Article 30, the dimensional standards, the first page of that article. You haven't seen a revised version of
I
that.
just have to
No,
get
we don't have a revised.
And which way does it stand now? I'm sorry.
It was-
Right now, it requires an
Okay.
85-foot setback in the industrial districts,
From the right of way?
from the edge of the right of way.
Okay, and it's
For
changing
the-
to?
For the discussion we had the last go-around, was we had agreed on 65 feet.
Yeah, that's
And-
what my notes show.
What were the side, setbacks, just so the front was 65, you have the side there, so I can write it in my notes?
In the general industrial, the side yard is 50 feet, and the rear yard is also 50 feet.
So the front was 65 and 50.
Yeah, that's the general industrial. The light industrial has a slightly smaller setback for the side, 35 feet.
I can't say that there's any, but, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And that's the setback, the front yard setback line controls the extent of buildings or all uses?
It's primarily the location of the building in relation to the road right of way. It would typically also cover some other activities, but we're allowing things like outdoor storage, which would be the principal use of the property. We're allowing that in the front yard.
I'd like to make a suggestion on this, and it's kind of just, whether it would ever happen, I don't know, but I'd suggest that that number be placed from road center line, not right of way. And the reason behind that is eminent domain. Someone comes in and says, we want to widen the road, it was 66, and now we're gonna make it 126. Now all of a sudden you possibly have all these buildings that are within a right-of-way band that was defined from the edge of the right-of-way. So once that edge moves, their buildings move. They would be more protected if it was from road center line, which is already mapped, drawn out, you know, everything like that. So if anybody comes in under an eminent domain claim or something happens and the right-of-way widens 10 years from now, our business owners would be protected.
That was our idea in 2001.
Was it?
That's actually-
That's exactly what.
You missed that whole discussion.
Well, I missed a lot of things, but.
The challenge we have is that we have two kinds of lots. We have unplatted lots, like we're talking about, that go out to the center of the road and have a right-of-way easement on top of them. And then we have platted lots that have a right-of-way that's separate. And the goal is not to have two different kinds of measurements. I certainly understand your point. They are completely protected because
Under a
somebody.
grandfather clause,
Right.
that they already have a building there.
Right, and there's language in the ordinance that talks about expansions of non-conforming structures. There are ways that they can work with that and would not, that would not be an onerous issue.
Would it be possible to put some sort of language in this document stating that that is our intent and that they would be, I mean, it's an if come, I know, but I just lived this.
Exactly.
So, but,
And it would kind of look, I don't want to speak out of turn.
it's up to,
It kind of looked kind of funny if the road right-of-ways were changed and then you got two buildings on either side of a vacant lot, and then you got to push the one back, and it would look kind of silly.
well,
If you're building a new
it's
building.
just- okay, well, I mean, we could say 65 feet from right-of-way based on a 66-foot wide, you know, this is assuming anything, you know, going beyond this 66-foot wide would be not considered. We could put some sort of wording in there for that. Someone comes in, widens a road, and they say it's ours, and they want to, you know, and then all of a sudden their building's out of the way, and they say, well, you have to move your building anyway because it doesn't meet ordinance. You know, if you're telling me that they'd be grandfathered in, great. There wouldn't be any problem. If you're telling me they'd be protected in a court of law from anybody trying to develop, great.
Let me take if it be all right, I'd like to take a look at that a little further and see how best to deal with that. Whether we should deal with it here in the dimensional standards or maybe discuss that more in that non-conforming section. The non-conforming buildings section, we have tried to make that more flexible. We've tried to add flexibility in the ordinance so that if you have those kinds of circumstances, there are ways to work with it. And let me take a look at that and just make sure if we've covered that there, or if there's something more we can add to it. I certainly understand the point. I have no objection to it at all.
I don't think that was around in 2001.
That's also something that could occur in other districts as well. Commercial, for example. Any district where the county, would widen or request widening of the right-of-way, that would be an issue. But I
they don't
think what Rodney
request.
said is that is an issue, but I think that the place to look at it, as he stated, would be in the non-conforming use section where it would be specifically addressed so that you wouldn't be creating an absolute non-conformity without any rights, as what's being discussed here.
Thank you.
I think that covers that set of changes.
I'm sorry?
That covers that set of changes related to the outdoor storage and such.
Maybe
I
we
got one more, I can go back, but, and under the first item number 1, under 40.503, you scratched item B, but we kind of glossed over item A, just kind of went right on by.
They agreed to accept the attorney's recommendation for A.
That was just a typo change.
What, I don't see where, what we agreed to last meeting was, I don't see why A is even in there. I don't know why, well, even we're talking about typo.
Well, you're talking about not requiring a fence in the front yard, just.
Right.
Okay.
The only requirement in the front yard was going to be the green belt.
Okay.
That's what you just discussed.
What are you questioning? Which section of the language?
40.503, the very beginning of the outdoor storage general, under number 1, item A.
1A.
Yeah.
I have a 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 breaks into A, B, C.
I'm sorry?
one,
I have under 40.503. We have one, but I don't have a 1A.
But that's in this little.
Right, because the,
Revisions.
in the revision.
you have to look at the list of the changes,
This one. Thank you.
okay, because it was redrafted February 25th. Okay, and your concern's 1A?
Yes.
Okay, so 1A, basically, we're talking about outside storage, and it says, shall be enclosed within a solid wall or opaque fence per subsection 503.3.
If it's in the front yard.
Right?
Right.
Okay. And so,
But that's only if
it
it's
it says,
enclosed.
and I can understand the, let's say you have a lot where it's residential on one side and general industrial on the other, right? The way you would read this is because you have, it's adjacent to a rural district or whatever, that you would have to enclose the storage area completely rather than just have the transition strips, which would be required on the side that abutted, let's say, rural.
The way I read it, it covers everywhere.
It covers the front yard. It's requiring a solid fence in the front yard area if you're putting outdoor storage in the front yard area. And that's consistent with the current ordinance, which requires a fence for any new outdoor storage. So we're actually reducing the standards significantly by saying that the fence is only required in this case where it's in the front yard area or where it's adjacent to those lesser land uses.
And what you're saying is we look at our current zoning ordinance, the requirement is in essence the same.
It's actually a little less than.
It's not even as restrictive as the current
It's never
requirement.
happened before, Mr. Shepherd. Anyone had to do
Okay,
this.
and if I recall, that's when we got into the discussion about, what's a solid wall, and those are all site plan review things where the planning commission has its discretion to, can review proposals from the person developing the property and make adjustments as appropriate.
Right.
So, yes, Mr. Camp.
Just help me, man, I don't know. Number one, right here on 405, the edited version, thanks guys. Storage areas must be located outside of all landscape strips, transition buffers for the district where the facility is located. Please, someone draw me a picture where outside landscape strips and outside transition buffers.
Yeah, it should
I read this inside.
Not located within those things, that's the language. It's either within or it's not within.
Okay, so,
Outside of is referring to, you can't put storage inside of a landscape strip.
okay, the landscape strip is the area, okay. Okay, I would be all for maybe wording that says, inside of the property from landscape strips or something good, okay. Okay. Okay, so there's a landscape strip outside.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Horton.
I have a drawing, the last one in the general industrial right here, Mr. Stonte's property, and it don't have no fence in front of the property under the old ordinance, under the present ordinance we got. We've never had to put a fence. Most of the time, if you had a green belt, like my piece of property, you had to put a green belt up between you and the road. And that was it, but not a fence that you can't see through, like a wooden fence across, or, I don't know what old plate means, but is that what you're saying, is we have to put a fence across the front of our property?
That's what, and the current ordinance does require that right now, whether it was done or not, that's what the ordinance language says.
Well, that's what the current ordinance requires, but that only applies to new development, correct? It's,
And outdoor storage.
pardon?
In outdoor storage, that's a requirement. It's only if
Or
you do-
new outdoor storage, a new use of outdoor storage on an existing parcel perhaps. Okay.
Chubb Road, you've got industrial across from industrial.
I'm sorry?
On Chubb Road, you've got industrial right across the road from another industrial. You've got to put a fence up between, actually Callow's got a fence up just to get his trucks in and lock people out. You don't have a fence, and he's the second one that's had there. There's no fence on his drawings. The fence in the front that you can't see through is unreasonable. Especially if you've got a lot that's half a mile wide.
I understand the point you're making.
It's unreasonable.
But
No fence on anywhere else there is, and all of a sudden, this never came up before, ever. And I've come before you folks twice, 3 times.
Okay, but, so we're sitting here with some good observations on your part,
Are you the
Mr.
last
Hart.
one?
Well, no, just let me finish, okay? And we also have the fact that the existing ordinance, as it's written, requires this level of screening or more. I think that's a fact, right? And what the planning commission has to do is understand if the nature of the change to eliminate the requirement for screening is in the best interest of the township as we take the draft forward, okay? And I'll just tell you, I need some more deliberation on this personally, because I would not say that the way the township writes its zoning ordinances needs to be such that every property as it exists now is in complete compliance.
Can we just note 3D, landscape berm and greenbelt may be substituted for a required wall or fence when approved by the planning commission?
I'm sorry?
3D, under section 40.503, a landscaped berm and greenbelt may be substituted for a required wall or fence when approved by the planning commission. Now is that under the same word storage?
We could make that a right now it's under 3, so it's applying basically just for those, where it's adjacent to those lesser land uses, but we could make that a general statement. And in fact, quite frankly, in the landscaping section, the landscaping section itself gives the planning commission discretion to make that change. But we can make a note here, so that is an option.
What we got to do first is decide what the purpose of it is. I've read that fences are to block sightline. I've read that fences are to block dust from blowing over from piles. I've heard that we have no storage in front of the building so that we can see the main building, but now we're talking about a fence that would block you from seeing that main building that we wanted to see from the road. We got to decide what our purpose is here and then follow that purpose. If we want debris to keep from blowing, then it has to be a debris stopping fence. If we want a nice sight line, I would certainly go after something that doesn't cost $1 million to install or maintain. So I would encourage right now, we just define what the purposes are for these perimeters that we'd like to control for whatever reason, and then chase after that. Because right now, we're kind of redefining what purpose it is every time we're talking about the same items. Fence, green belt, landscaping line, something like that. But we're not all aiming the same direction.
The key, I think, through this section is the screening element of it. And the fence along the front, I think it's intended to be, as it says, an opaque screen. It's a solid block between you and what's behind the fence. Screening can be accomplished through other means, and berm can do that, or landscaping can do that, not necessarily to the same extent. but perhaps better in some cases. So certainly, I have no objection to simply leaving this with more flexibility for the planning commission to look at a site plan and consider whether screening, a little more dense screening would be better than putting up a fence.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go after if the materials are such that containment is required, not just line of sight, and can be deemed necessary, just that can be done. But otherwise, I mean, plant trees, walk away.
Yeah, I would like to hear from someone else. Here. I'm looking left, I'm looking right.
I feel like the purpose of it could change depending on what it is, so I agree that it should be left with more flexibility so that we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
I agree.
Sounds quiet.
Well, I guess I'd like to suggest, if we don't know how to word that exactly, then I think we need to charge Mr. Nanny and Mr. Pennington with trying to draft something along those lines.
Just it basically to allow for options, whether
Yes.
whether it's a fence or whether it's additional screening or a berm or something else.
I mean,
Even if it's necessary, I mean, when they're up, why spend the money if it's not necessary?
And I think what we want to do is we want to structure the discussion on this item and start off with a little perspective from our experts as to, that would help us understand maybe what other similar communities do, and then help us get into the discussion on the purpose of this screening, okay, as it applies to a general industrial district. I mean, that might seem a little vague, but I think we need to be calibrated, because we wouldn't want to make unusual requirements here in Salem Township, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want a situation where if you walked into as you drove into the general industrial district, or, along the roads that abut the general industrial district that also abut rural areas, that it looks like something out of downtown Detroit, I mean, personally. And I don't think that's the case here, but I know we've taken great pains over the last year when we were going through the site plan reviews and such on Kalo Trucking to ensure that that was done and the screening was affected properly. And, yes, Mr.
Oh, I
Kennedy.
don't mean to interrupt you, I didn't wait. I think the comment that was just made by Bart is one that is worthy of consideration. If we look at similar areas in the township, we always bring up, the character issue. Industrial can have character, commercial can have character, but the real character is what you see going up and down the road. And we went with that site plan that you made mention with some berming and some landscaping along the road, which is a character as to how that looks. In most instances, the type of industrial is going to be submitted by the applicant based upon the need for a fence. If he is enclosing certain things that might be more subject to vandalism or whatever, in most instances, he will provide the fence. Based upon the comments, I'm one that would believe that in all instances, a fence is not necessary along the front of the property, simply because of the character that I'm talking about. A berm and the landscaping strip that we've talked about, in most instances, gives a nice buffer, a nice shield, a nice screen, a nice character going down the road, and that's what we're after. If we're joining to other industrial, as Mr. Horton made reference to, that's a different situation. Industrial next to residential, we don't need the transition strip that we've talked about going down the roadway. We might want to look at the character, and having a fence, to me, is something that could be adjusted with wording, discretion of the planning commission, discretion of the applicant. So I think this would be very easy to solve.
Yes, Mr. Martin.
Can I ask a question? Have you ever driven down Chubb Road and seen industrial?
No.
You've actually looked at it?
Many times, yeah.
Well, I haven't, place right next to the old dump that's got a fence that's fallen down, the cyclone fences that you can climb over. And I got 400 feet. You expect me, if I go to put an addition on, to put a fence across that next to a house that's not non-conforming, that's got trees all over it? It doesn't make any sense. There's only the non-conforming houses north of the tracks. There's, I think, 2 lots. I'm on the other side. There's nothing left. Along 5 Mile, you've got one place at 35 acres, you know, where the much is between the box factory and the welding shop. On 6 Miles, built out, except for those houses, and they're not conforming. We're kind of, we're not Birmingham here. We're Salem Township. We have some sort of you know, we're out in the country. So why do we have to build a fence you can't see when on both sides you've got junk? You know? So it'd be different if you started this in 1970 when the ordinance came out and adhered to it. But now you've only got a few places left. So you're going to have an ugly place and a nice oblique fence. Doesn't make no sense. Doesn't make no sense.
I think you have.
Okay, but if we're talking about one,
We're planning, we're saying we'll take that out and change that to basically
we're
require
talking
screening,
about
but
5031,
require screening, but leave it to the discretion of the planning commission as to whether screening should be required or what type of screening.
Mm-hmm.
And the landscaping and screening section of the ordinance already gives that discretion. So I just carry that over here.
Well, again, I think we need something drafted that's clearer, that takes into account the concerns that we've expressed here, and I'll just, I'll second Mr. Can's observation, which is that in many cases, I'm looking at, you know,
Let the purpose fit the need.
something, screening that's not a fence would be preferred.
Which would
Particularly on the
represent
front of a
character
property.
we're after.
You want to leave the option of a fence in there, because you may have a developer that comes in that wants to protect his property, and he's going to want a fence along the front of that property,
And then we can do
if
that.
it's for outdoor storage.
Well,
And that-
I
you
think-
still have that flexibility.
Yeah, I don't think, we're not talking about anything that wouldn't allow the fence,
Okay.
right?
You just don't want to take
We're
the
saying
hotel.
We're
Not-
we're recognizing the value of screening with vegetation in many instances.
Yeah, the landscaping and screening section actually has a menu approach to screening, and one of the items is a fence. So that in certain circumstances, a
It
fence can be
steps up
used.
as,
Yeah.
Right, so anytime an applicant can put a fence, so there's no place in the ordinance that we prohibit the use of the fence for that kind of thing.
All right, yes, sir.
I think what you need is, I don't know how you get there, but the goal should be to make things look better down through there. I'm like saying, with a fence, you're not gonna get it necessarily with a fence. What you're asking people to do is spend money on objects and things that are of no benefit. Where you need to be asking them to spend the money is on that landscaping and putting something nice out there. That's where your focus needs to be.
Yeah, I would agree based upon what I said a moment ago. I think that's totally unacceptable.
Yeah, we'll make that adjustment.
Do we have anything else to go through on Mr. Samhat's letter? It was, I note that it was just a short diversion.
It tended to be. Most of the items we're okay with that. No, that was, I believe that was all that we had for
All right. Can we then get back to what, Article 40 in the rural
that.
aspects, right?
My suggestion is we start at the beginning of Article 40 and take a look at the rural section.
That's fine.
I had two.
All I gotta do is find a copy waiver Article 40.
I think it's still yours.
All right, well, you're gonna run us through this, right? When we were last reviewing these, we kind of we started with the synopsis of the section. And the changes we were making, or affirmation of the fact that we weren't changing.
Well, this rural uses section, this covers activities that, primarily in the agricultural districts. Some of them are farm-related, but they are not activities that are regulated by the Right to Farm Act. You might call them value-added activities, things like on page 40-2, we have farm-based tourism and entertainment activities and farm markets. That's primarily intended to provide additional revenue streams for farmers. It is the section that we spent a lot of time with the Three Cedars Farm, and we had discussions with some of the other similar operations in the area. This is the section that they would come in under. It's a conditional use. It requires a public hearing anytime somebody wants to propose something along the lines of corn mazes and other activities like that. This is where they would fall.
Okay. So we talk about agricultural services and farm supply stores.
If I may, we had
Yes,
a,
of course. We're always open to suggestions.
we had a conversation with Ms. Hamilton a few weeks ago, and she had some comments. They're not all related to Article 40, but they're all related to agricultural activities. And this may be a good time for you to hear her suggestions.
I'm certainly amenable to that, if you'd like to get us started here.
Well, if we stay with your Article 40, if we look at 40.203, it's titled Farm Labor Housing.
203? Okay, give me a second.
Yes, sir.
Farm labor housing?
Yes.
Okay.
And the discussion we had is that this type of housing is for more migrant-type workers. It's for an operation that grows fruits and vegetables. They would sell at roadside stands. They would probably take their produce to Eastern Market or sell to local restaurants and stores. This does not address people that have dairy farms and horse farms, because the type of labor housing we need is very different. When you have, in this community, there are horses that are worth in excess of $100,000. You don't allow those mares to go into labor without supervision. Even on our farm, a dairy cow, we have invested many thousands of dollars in her before she has her first calf. The type of housing that we need is called a herdsman housing. It is somebody who lives on the farm year-round. They work at the farm. Somebody in the home may have an off-the-farm job, but their primary responsibility is to be there to supervise the herd in those nighttime hours when the rest of the people who work at the farm are sleeping. That type of housing is not addressed in Article 40 at all, and when I talked with Mr. Nanny and Mr. Pennington, we thought that perhaps it would be a good idea to simply, rather than to try to rewrite what's there to fit both types of housing needs, because both are truly needed, that you add something that addresses, currently I can have a second house on my farm for my herdsmen. I don't have to have it on a separate parcel. It's allowed. And we'd like to see that, again, if this, and it's very simple, if the township is serious about keeping agriculture here, and I believe it is, then all we're asking is that you provide those tools for us to continue to be able to farm. And again, whether it's the horse farms in the community or it's the dairy farms, we need that ability to have the second home.
And that wording's in the current.
It is allowed currently.
We can make that change to.
I'm sorry?
And we can make that change to ensure that's allowed. That certainly is, I think, a very good addition to the ordinance.
I agree that's every bit as important.
We'll make the change.
Did you have other?
Yeah, the next one within Article 40 is, and it's really not unique to agriculture, but it perhaps is unique in my neighborhood, it's 40.2075C.
All right, give me a second. I get that.
The only working plant on your vegetables is
Single and two-family dwelling,
So page 40-23.
40-23.5C.
What's the issue with 207?
Okay, it says a roof shall be finished with shingles or similar materials. A couple of things, I have a home in my neighborhood that is an underground home, so the roof is sod. We also have a lot of homes coming into the community that are being re-shingled with metal roofing. And I don't believe that those two options are currently offered under this section, and I think they should be. I think you're gonna see more and more metal roofing. It's a 70-year product. We've used it on our barns for 100 years, and you are seeing it move into Michigan because your asphalt shingles simply don't last like the manufacturer claims they will. And we'd simply, again, representing my neighborhood, we'd like to see roofs shall be finished with something greater than just shingles or similar materials. And we still like the option in our community for other underground homes, especially because they're considered to be green homes. They use the heat of the ground to both keep the house a certain degree during the winter and also during the summer, so you have very little need for additional heat and cooling. This, what you currently have, does not allow me to have an underground home.
Her comments, I appreciate them because they do bring up a very valid point related to energy efficiency. Right now is another one of those times where we're seen a lot of experimentation with materials. I mean, underground homes have been around in one form or another for a long time, but we're seeing a much greater variety of materials showing up. So I think there's a valid point to be made to allow for other things, whether we allow them in all the districts or allow the greater variety in the rural areas and require some to be a little more strict in the denser neighborhoods. That's again a question of policy. But there is a valid point about the variety of materials that are being made available today.
So I guess I have to, we're talking about single-family homes, right?
And again, this is an issue of visual character. That's what, and much of the ordinance, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the visual character of the neighborhood. Metal roofing is a bit different than it has been in the past. I think it was mentioned, metal roofing was typically on barns and not on houses. Well, today we have a much higher quality of material that has a good visual character for single-family homes. So it may be a good addition to it. Some of the other questions, again, it somewhat depends on if we're talking about a rural area versus, in the hamlet. Do we want to allow that greater variety in the hamlet? Those are really the policy questions as it relates to visual character.
I guess what I would say, personally, is I think that the standards we write should be what's appropriate for a rural area rather than for a suburban area. Personally.
Why are we even messing with roof material? Why do you want, I mean, it's gotta pass a building inspection, right? It's not, they're not gonna make it out of thatch.
Well, the reason that this is in here is unfortunately, you can get in circumstances where folks throw up tar paper and call it done. And it creates a light on the character of the area,
But
essentially.
if a building inspector went there, would he pass that roof?
Sure, if it met the code, absolutely. It doesn't have to be pretty to meet the
People
code.
put copper on the roofs over little gondolas too, and they look gorgeous, and they age and they get slightly greened and oxidized, and we wouldn't allow them.
But see, one thing you need to remember is that these provisions came out of, in the past, these provisions applied only to mobile homes that were put on an individual residential lot. That's where this started. In the past, a number of years ago, we were seeing these single-wide mobile homes that were being hauled out onto 2-acre lots and hooked up to utilities, and that was the home. And the complaint that came out of that in many communities was, that single-wide mobile home doesn't look like my $150,000 home next door, okay, at the time, 20 years ago, $150,000.
Put up a fence.
And so
Sorry.
I'm just trying to give you the background so you understand where this came from. So these standards were put into many ordinances to say that it doesn't matter, that mobile home needs to meet the same visual character standards that the stick-built house would look like. And what it effectively did was prohibit single-wide mobile homes from being dropped onto a 2-acre lot. That was a practical aspect of it. The courts basically said you cannot discriminate on housing type. And so these standards were then made to simply apply generally to all single-family homes. The intent is that no matter how your home is built, that it needs to have the general appearance and character of a single-family home, stick-built home in the township. And so that's why we're talking about wall materials. That's why we're talking about roof materials. We're not trying to get at you can only paint it blue. What we're trying to get at, it needs to have that character of a stick-built single-family home.
And I would state the material has to be that typical of a finished roof. A finished roof may have steel, a finished roof may have sod, a finished roof may have shingle. It will be that of a finished roof.
Like I said, unfortunately, with that comes the rolled roofing materials.
Yes.
So that's the only issue basically with that. Yeah,
Well, I would,
because that would meet the code. I mean, it could be done to meet the code. I don't have any objection to that if that's your preference, but that is basically the issue. It is that it would allow.
Okay,
that.
so we understand what the purpose is, and now the question is how do you do that in a way that doesn't exclude, let's call it a nice Mediterranean style, finished concrete type exterior, right?
I think we just have to have a longer list of materials. That's the key, and we can do that and bring that back to you.
Please.
Yeah.
Shingle metals are appropriate materials.
Yeah, I think we may even get a little more specific.
There's a half
Yeah,
dozen.
there's a half.
There's a half dozen of good materials that we have to go, that would solve the issue that we're discussing.
the next roof I put on my house will be a raised ridge steel roof, paint over galvanized. No questions asked.
Bart, Rural Regatta Ionia's got the best prices, $22.37 a run.
I won't need a roof for 40 years, my boys will be putting it on. That'll be the next roof.
We'll make the change. We'll expand this as far as the product that could be utilized.
Yes, Ms. Cook.
I'd like to ask if anybody up there has actually seen the new metal roofs that are out. They look beautiful. They look like shingles. They can be made like any color you want, and they just look like they're perfect roofs. And there are some in the township that I have seen, and they've been up for years, and they don't even look dirty.
I think that's a good.
It also costs about 5 times as much as the shingle
Right,
roof.
but they're not the old tin roofs that you're talking about that go on bars.
Okay.
We'll make the change.
Oh, all right, so we're good on that.
Very nice barn with the steel roof.
Did you have any other comments?
Not on 40, I do have other comments, so I don't know how you want to handle it.
Are we as far as we've gotten with the comments right now? Are we up to 40.207? Are we have to go backwards now.
Well, we're doing a little jumping around. I think
Yeah,
if,
I would suggest that we start at the beginning and go through, and then as comments come up in that section, we take them at that point.
well, this, one comment that Ms. Hamilton made, I think
Oh, okay.
is a good one to address, if I may, about the ER district. In Article 10, we set out the purposes for the various districts. And in the ER district, the estate residential district, we talk about farming, and farming is a permitted activity in that district. But in the purpose statement, we don't actually state that farming is intended to be part of that district. And she had suggested simply adding a statement that states that any statement that recognizes that farming and agricultural can be included in the district and is compatible with the other land uses that are permitted in the ER district. And that's, again, I would simply say that that's an excellent addition to that
And if
purpose
I could
statement.
follow through on what Mr. Manny has said, if you were to get the map, the zoning map for the township right now, and you were to look at where ER is, all of the undeveloped ER land is currently in agriculture. There's probably close to 200 acres, maybe even a little bit more. It's owned primarily by us and the Coils, and it's farmed. And our problem is, again, if this is a township that truly wants to keep agriculture, why would you have a classification for agricultural land? And we've been farming our land since 1958 when we bought it. Why isn't agriculture one of its actual uses? And so that's our concern, again, as people have options and they try to look at how you continue to keep your farming. It's not helpful for us to have a zoning classification on our agricultural land where farming is not part of its normal use.
Let's add it.
I understand the point you're making very clearly, and I'm not enough of an expert to understand what the precedent would be that sets things up as AR versus.
Well, Doug, if I could maybe help clarify that, I asked Don and Rodney a question. I said, what's the purpose of ER zoning in 2013? Now, I know what it was in 1972. But what was its purpose? What is its purpose today in 2013? And there really is no valid purpose. I don't want to speak for these gentlemen, but at our discussion, they could not give me one. But I'd actually like to propose is that you do away with ER and the land be AR. That's what it is. It's being farmed. And it's being farmed, again, primarily by two families. And it ought to be agricultural, residential, or rural, whatever you're classifying it in the future. It shouldn't be estate residential. What estate land usually is, it's where you want to come in and you want to have these McMansions on larger parcels, particularly where people want to have horse farms. That's not what this is. This is land that's truly in agriculture. I have alfalfa on 70 acres and I have wheat on 30 acres. And the probably 60 to 80 acres to the east of me had soybeans last year. I don't know what they'll have this year. And so it really should be land that's farmed. That's what it is. It's not an estate residential type of thing. And that was a discussion we had. In fact, the land prior to 1972 was agricultural residential when we bought it. There was no public hearing to rezone it. It really ought to be agricultural residential, and that was actually what I proposed, but I said, if we can't get to that point, then let's at least in estate residential have as part of its logic that it can be farmed and should be farmed.
Oh, okay, but I just want to ask a question. Are we having a discussion about the zoning of a particular parcel or about the appropriateness of having a certain zoning classification in and of itself?
Correct, having
Which
that
one?
ER classification in and of itself.
So your question is why do we have AR?
No.
The estate residential.
I know why we have AR, I don't understand ER.
ER.
And Doug, understand.
Estate residential. And if okay, now, estate residential is defined here, right? And I'll ask a question, is this classification unique to Salem Township in southeastern Michigan? Or are there other examples of it?
It's not unique to Salem Township. As Ms. Hamilton made reference, most people know the history of this district, why it really came about. You don't need to go into that unless it's necessary. It is a 5-acre, large lot, residential district, is basically what it is. And as she has mentioned, primarily designed and intended for the larger houses, the estate type of housing. There are other communities that have similar districts. Some of them are 5, some of them are 3, and some of them are 2 acres. Designed for this large lot residential, giving another type of residential within a community. So it's not unique to Salem. It is something that a lot of communities within this general area have within their zoning ordinances. Determining if you want one is a policy decision because it is designed for very large lot, high value residential types of development.
Do we have property in Salem Township currently zoned this classification?
We do, as Ms. Hamilton made reference to. What is it, a couple hundred acres or something?
Yeah, we own 110, and I think Coils have 80 to 100. It's, Doug, it's, if you come down 5 Mile east of Curtis Road, on the south side, is you come, it's right where Beacon Farm, Beacon Lane comes out onto 5 Mile. You start to see a couple big fields. And when the Land Preservation Board presented their report to the Township Board, they had pictures of just 2 farms in Salem Township. One of those farms is what we call our East Farm, which is our farm east of Curtis Road on 5 Mile that we're discussing right now, where the township doesn't even say it ought to be agriculture, yet we've been farming it since 1958. And they had pictures to go to the Township Board of, this is farmland, you know, these are the things we're trying to preserve, and that's what I'm saying, we are getting, as farmers, a mixed message from the township. We want farmers, but our ordinance doesn't quite match up what we need. And again, as all farmers have today to struggle with keeping your farm going, we need to have language, just like general industrial needs language that allows them to conduct their business. We need language that helps us keep our farms farming. I mean, we can,
Okay.
because otherwise.
I'm a little confused.
Okay.
Because you referenced a specific parcel.
Well, you asked where it was. There's a series of parcels. We own 3 of the probably 5 or 6 remaining parcels. It started along Curtis Road. If you know where Mr. Roperty lives,
Yes.
he is on a state residential. As you come down from his house all the way to 5 Mile, that's the developed estate residential.
Okay.
When you get onto 5 Mile, all the parcels behind that are undeveloped and farmed.
All right, but my question is, are those lots actually zoned as state residential, or are they in an area that's just designated as state residential in the master plan?
They were, well, and that's an interesting question. The township claims they were zoned as state residential back in 1972. On your zoning map, if you have a map in front of you, it will say ER on those parcels.
Yes, Mr. Nan.
I think my suggestion would be to, I think the change we've made to clarify the intent statement for the ER district to say agriculture is intended to be permitted there and is compatible with the other activities allowed in the ER district. I think that addition with the fact that farming is a permitted land use in the ER district already in the land use table covers the ground that was raised. The question of whether or not the property should be, or any property should be zoned ER, my suggestion is we defer that to when we're looking at the master plan. And the reason is a practical one. We don't want to take a district out of this ordinance when we have land zoned for that district, because then that land would not be lawfully zoned in any way.
I understand.
But as part of the master plan update, we can look at, and we would look at all of the classifications in the township and consider whether changes need to be made. And then, if there is a desire to make a change related to ER district, that would come out of that master plan update process, and we could make that adjustment at that point.
What you said makes perfect sense to me.
Can this move someone into a different tax base because of, if it's being used agriculturally and it's ER, can that be taxed higher than property that's AR and being used for the same purpose?
I would say it wouldn't have any effect here.
Cannot?
No.
Okay.
Tax is
Great
based
answer.
on, taxing is based on the highest and best use of your property.
Bart, to better answer your question, that was a half
And they're actually
answer.
zoned that.
It's taxed on its, based on its historic value. Its appraisal is based on what it can become. So when you get your statement from the township assessor, you have two numbers on that form. You have a state equalized value, which absolutely is based on what the land can become. It's its best and highest use. The taxable value is based on its historic value. So to just say no is not a true answer.
Oh, I understand. Okay. All right, so now we're starting to talk about a problem with an individual parcel rather than,
No, it's with a whole, Doug, a whole series of parcels that are being farmed. It's not one parcel. There's a whole series of them along 5 Mile Road.
okay. I'm not, again, I'm not the expert at that, but I would think that if a person wanted to propose changing the zoning of a parcel, they could do that.
I think you've had an ER district since the 90s.
Pardon?
You've had an ER district since the 70s.
Yeah. And we're not talking about permitted use in an area, we're just talking about we seem to be
I think
mired a little bit in the actual zoning that's applied to some particular parcels quite some time ago.
I think we've covered the issue as far as the ordinance language is concerned, and I think that perhaps the issue related to particular parcels in the township, should defer that to when we're looking at the master plan, or if somebody proposes rezoning.
Or the zoning map itself. Yes, I agree. Okay. Did we have anything else? We were giving you a chance here, Ms. Hamilton.
Okay. Let me bring up my notes.
I think
You are renaming some of your zoning from agricultural residential to agricultural rural. Will there be a public notice to all landowners, all affected landowners?
Yeah, I think we mentioned that once before, and that was,
no, simply changing the title of the district, it does not require any individual notice, and it doesn't affect, it doesn't affect the property, the owners in any way. It's simply calling the district what it actually is, which is
agricultural residential. I agree completely. Okay.
Excuse me,
Yes.
if it doesn't affect us in any way, and it doesn't make any difference, why are we doing it? Why are you renaming it from agricultural residential to agriculture, whatever it is? If it doesn't, you should just.
I believe Mr. Nanny said that they should all reference the agricultural residential district, and that'll be corrected. Right?
Well, the key with the language, the reason it was suggested to change it to an agricultural rural/rural district was because this is the rural district of the township. It is a district where farming is the primary activity, where open space and rural activities are the primary intended character of that area. residences are certainly part of that. Rural residences are part of that. But the farming and open space character of it, rural character of it is the key. The main reason for it is that it emphasizes that preservation of that rural environment. This is, unfortunately, we have developers, and when they see the word residential, they think that means subdivision. And so we want to be clear on what we expect that district to look like. The language of the district says that, but the title suggests something different when it has the word residential. And so that's why we simply suggested changing the word residential to rural. It's not to prohibit residences. Residences are, we're not making any change to the provisions that cover rural residences. It's just to make it more clear what that district is going to be like.
I don't know how the other people here feel, but to me, if we're not changing the way the uses are in the district and such, that to me, changing the title suggests the uses should be changing. And if we're keeping them the same, I would just as soon keep the title the same, personally.
We certainly can do that.
I understand your point, but I think, I don't want to get into a label game.
If and when a developer would come and be interested in that land for doing something that wasn't permitted, he'd get stopped no matter what it was named.
My preference is always to stop them when they're looking at the zoning map, but I agree with you. Yes, we would, if he came in and proposed something that didn't meet what the ordinance required, he would be turned down. Whoever it is. I wouldn't name
No,
names.
he's unstoppable.
All right.
But we'll certainly do that. We can make the correction back.
Yes, Mr. Heil.
Back to the discussion you were having on the estate residential.
On
estate residential. I think the outcome of that was that you're going to put wording in there for agricultural farming,
To allow farming.
to allow farming.
Under the intent.
The only question I would have, and I think you should allow farming, I don't want to sound different, but I think maybe just like you did with the looking at naming the different types of roofing material, there might be a reason here, because it's estate residential and it's primarily there for estates, that you may want to define what type of farming, because farming of crops is different than farming of livestock like pigs or that type of thing. So there might be a reason why you might want to define or at least think of that, because
Under Michigan right to farm, you can't tell me what I can farm on my east farm.
that's right.
If I
No,
wanted
no,
to
I
put
understand.
in-
I
If I
understand.
wanted to run my dairy cows there, I have every right to do that. So you cannot put the stipulation suggested. You cannot tell me where I can have livestock and where I cannot.
That's if they put the recommendation in there to provide agricultural.
Well,
Farming.
it's actually, farming is already allowed in the R district.
Oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
don't worry about
And
that.
unfortunately, that is true, that we can't differentiate it
Okay.
between pig farm and dairy farm or a crop farm.
Yeah, it's already in the chart, it's just not in the paragraph. It's
Okay.
what started this.
Okay, so when I look at the uses, I'm just on page 20-3. Okay, because this is the way I would look at it, to understand what the differences are. And estate residential and agricultural residential allow conservation areas or open space, farms for production of food, feed, or fiber, farm-based tourism, entertainment, farm products, direct marketing businesses, greenhouse or tree farms, keeping of animals, non-farm, kennel, privates up to 6 animals, private riding arena or boarding stable, roadside stands, and then you get into, and those are the rural uses, right? And then there's residential uses like foster care homes or group homes is common in both. And so now if I look at the differences, right, AR allows a accessory single-family dwelling detached, which ER does not. AR allows farm labor housing, which ER does not. Sod farm is allowed in AR, but not in ER.
I think we should change that, or at least consider it. The fact that there's the word farm in it.
Pardon?
A sod farm.
You're a sod farm, pig farm, hay farm, and you're not allowing farming, you're not allowed sod farming in an area that says you can
Yeah,
have farming.
Yeah, I would agree that we
Yeah,
should
let's-
put that.
And so, what I'm trying to do is understand, if what we're saying here, there's any different, I don't believe we call out any farming-related usage differences other than the sod farm, and then the farm labor housing and such. Is that everyone else's understanding? So, you know, the point you're making, I think we're good here.
Okay.
And I don't believe you're outlawing, you know, you're prohibiting any meaningful farming with the ER designation. Is that correct?
Right,
That's the intent.
that's right.
Okay. All right, so we're going through agricultural and residential and rural here. Have we,
We're good, thank you.
do you have other points to make? We're good?
We're good.
Okay.
I think at this point, I would suggest we go to Article 40, and basically, I would, maybe the thing to do would just be go part by part, the first part being the rural uses,
Yep.
up to page 9, and just ask if there are any comments or questions about any of those sections.
All right, so which page?
Let's call it up to page 9.
40-9?
Yeah, up to that.
Okay. This is section 40.2, is that right?
4101,
40.1,
rural uses.
yeah, the rural uses. If there are any other comments or questions
Okay,
about
sorry.
that section first?
Okay, agricultural services. and farms.
The landscape is why it's.
Yep. Basically, carry that over.
Mr. Supervisor, got a key to the water cooler room here?
Yes.
You certainly can bring it.
I have a request for a 5-minute recess for bio break, I guess. Let's do that. And it's just 5 minutes, so it'll be 19 after. When we restart. Okay. I'm gonna read ahead of this.
I appreciate you guys being point.
How about, as a proposal to go through this, this section is basically defining all these uses.
It's basically setting standards for these activities, yes.
Okay, so why don't we, let's just read them off, and not read through them, and we'll just give people a chance to say I'm okay or not okay. You know, any questions, and if someone's got a question, they got about 5 seconds to speak up. Well, no, because there's a lot of definitions that are here.
Well, we'll just start with 40.101, agricultural services and farm supply stores.
Any questions? No, okay. Let's keep going.
4102, that is the farm-based tourism and entertainment activities and farm markets.
Any questions? Okay.
4103 is farm products direct marketing business. This is basically U-Pick is the most common one. It's really just simply saying that they're allowed and what it means.
Any questions? No.
4104 is farming operations, and what this essentially does is say that the GAMP standards apply. and leaves it at that. It's basically providing the zoning administrator something to hang his or her hat on if there's a complaint to refer to the game stations.
Any questions there?
Hang on a sec.
I don't think so.
He's got a question.
No.
He's working up to a question.
Okay.
All set.
You're set, okay. All right, let's go.
Yeah.
Next page is 40.105 is greenhouse. And this is the commercial greenhouse. Section mentions that doesn't apply to a greenhouse that you may have in your own backyard for your personal use as part of a residence.
Any questions? I don't think so, no. We're good.
4106 is kennels. There are two types of kennels, basically small and large. Some standards that apply to both.
Any questions? Let's keep going.
The next section is landscape businesses, 40.107. This is, much of this is a carryover from the current ordinance. And actually, there was a comment that came up I just want to bring to your attention related to on page 40-6, the lot area standards. It requires a minimum of 10 acres to have a landscape business. And that's certainly a good number. It ensures that they have plenty of area to work with, plenty of space. But you can have a landscape business on less than 10 acres. It is certainly possible to do that. And so, in fact, it's becoming more common to see kind of startup landscaping businesses operating on smaller parcels than 10 acres. And so I wanted to just bring that to your attention if there was an interest in changing that standard.
The existing,
How would we handle that then, if that came up?
Well, the minimum lot requirements of the district would still apply. So the AR district would be 2 acres. And they would still have to meet the requirements related to screening and storage. They'd have to have sufficient land area to do that.
is that for every district, 10 acres minimum?
For the landscape business, yes.
Just for a landscape business.
Because right now, Roy Haggard's on 5 acres.
Yeah, that's.
That's one of the reasons why we're bringing it up, is that at 5 acres is an option, certainly, and we've seen them elsewhere, landscaping businesses on smaller than 10 acres.
Existing.
This is what you have in your existing ordinance, but you certainly can.
What do we require now?
10.
10 acres.
Pardon?
10 acres.
10 acres, and I think that's excessive, I'm sorry.
That's what this is, the dimensions here are right out of the existing.
So
Personally, 5 acres is a good-sized lot, and I'm amenable to 5. I don't know how everyone else is, sir.
I mean, if the guy needs more land, he's gonna need more land. He's got offsets and sight lines and everything else he's gotta deal with. If he can't do the business within that, he's gonna look to expand. Let him do it on a half acre for all I care. You know, I mean,
He's got to be zoned for it also.
yeah. I mean,
Well, you allow as conditional uses landscaping businesses in the AR and the industrial districts, the light industrial and the general industrial.
There's not very many 10-acre parcels.
Yeah,
That's what we're saying.
That's what I'm
We
saying.
think this is too strict.
Yeah.
Now, we have setbacks in here. I mean, if we deleted the lot area requirement entirely, they still would have to have a substantial amount of land to make this work.
was it 5 acres?
I think the setback should be consistent with what we use in light industrial and general industrial.
Which would be the 65 feet for the front yard setback,
Yep.
and take it down to 5 acres.
I'm okay with 5.
He's talking about something like the rocks.
Agricultural residential can be split into 2.5 acre parcels. You're saying it's allowed in agricultural residential, you're saying agricultural residential can be split down into 2.5 acre.
2 acre.
Thank you, 2 acre, gosh, I should know that. Lots, I don't,
General does it, would be 2.5.
I mean, just by where it's allowed to be, sits
That's
there and
with
says
sewer.
what the size of the piece of property is. Seems dangerously
With sewer.
redundant.
In your industrial, the minimum is 2.5 acres with sewer. So,
But
Number 4, I mean, this is the type of stuff that just jumps out to me, guys.
we're talking retail sales. When you talk landscape businesses.
and they
Yeah.
are conditional use in the AR zoning district.
It can be an intensive activity, but it is a conditional use. Certainly 5 acres would be a reasonable reduction. If you want to go below that, simply match the zoning district, that's, basically when a project comes in, they've got to show how they can make it work on that small parcel.
I'd say just to match that of the area that it's zoned.
If you had a landscape business come in with the existing regulations in the ordinance to have display of product, which is what business is about, or a nursery, something of that nature, then you continue with the parking and the stormwater management and the setbacks and the transition, potentially the landscaping. You've got to have a pretty sizable parcel to make this work.
Okay.
So, based on what you said,
Restrict you.
it'd be very difficult, at least in my opinion, for someone to come in and revive a project in 2 acres anyway.
Okay.
I think it could be done in 5. 2, I think would be very difficult.
The guy found a perfect 4.9 acre parcel, and we tell him no?
Well, he could get a variance. I mean, he could seek a variance if he really has that issue. But you'll always have that issue. You will always, no matter what our lot size standard, we have lot area standards in the ordinance right now, and if your parcel is 1/10 of an acre below that, you're going to have to get a variance in order to build on that parcel. That's the case no matter what.
Yeah,
There's always going to be cases.
Folks that are grandfathered in, the way, they are the way they are, that's fine, but, a new business owner says,
But there's a practical issue that landscaping businesses are land intensive, and I would say that the 5 acres is, from a practical perspective, is a good number anyway. And so to simply say you need 5 acres ensures that you're not going to get somebody in on 2 that's trying to stuff that 10 bushels of apples into that 2 bushel basket.
what I zero in, guys, and I'm gonna take you off that, and I think that's going the right direction, is paragraph 4. Telling any business what is necessary and not necessary to run their business, I don't believe is good policy. Telling them, a flatbed, small equipment to haul necessary landscape products or other necessary equipment such as tractors and skid loaders.
Well, the reason this language is here is experience in other communities where somebody has said they're running a landscaping business, a small scale operation, and really what they're running is gravel hauling. And that's why these limitations are there, is to clarify this is not a gravel hauling operation, this is not a truck yard, this is a landscape business. And so it's basically it's talking about operations necessary. What it's saying is that you can have these things and not this larger number of things. It's placing a limitation on how much activity is allowed as part of the
So the
landscape.
guy's landscaping business takes off, and to keep his business thriving, he needs a bigger truck, and we're gonna tell him no.
If his business is thriving, he probably needs to move his business into the industrial district where he can have those activities.
If the problem is that we're trying to protect against gravel hauling, then say, not for hauling gravel used for commercial road use, go after the problem. Go after it. Hit it right there, and then be done.
This, like I said, this language is just based on experience in many communities, and that's how we've got it there to cover that.
Then let's protect it directly against what we're trying to protect against, nothing else.
Why are you using May instead of shall?
That list could be long.
Huh?
Couldn't that list be really long about what we're trying to
I mean,
protect against, because somebody's always gonna think of something new.
You gotta realize, these are allowed in residential, in your agricultural residential district, so you do want to protect against that type of activity
I've got
coming from a residential, the
gravel
A
haulers
district.
that are going down 5 Mile Road that are allowed to do 55 mile an hour in the morning while kids are standing out there in a school bus.
Where are they at?
You know,
5 mile.
They're not supposed to be.
well, you know.
Well, that's the speed limits basically on gravel roads, but that doesn't mean a gravel hauler can go that fast, or should go that fast.
They're not supposed to be on 5 Mile, because they're going through a no truck zone.
Maybe somebody should stand out there and watch.
Stand at Curtis and 5 in
Yes.
the morning. Just stand there at Curtis and 5. Watch them come down the ice slope. It's fun. It's all get out. But, you know, I mean, if there's a problem, you gotta go directly after the problem, guys. Let's not, I mean, I understand you guys have years of experience and you understand where all this comes from, but, and personal opinion is one problem that we have in America today is too many laws are made for the minority that go against the majority. And this is the small business owner that's trying to do whatever, and all of a sudden his brother-in-law gives him a 53-foot gravel hauler, and he says, well, I can't use it according to the ordinance. Sorry, thanks. You know, I mean, I've seen them being used and having trees packed in them because they can tarp them nicely and they protect them from the wind, they don't get knocked over, and you can haul a bazillion trees. A buddy of mine has one up north. That's what he hauls his trees in. But it's things like that that I'll zero in on.
I think that's,
Restricting a business.
I think that's valid. The last sentence of number 4 really distinguishes a little bit of what you're talking about. Just trying to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Cross everything off except the last sentence.
Well, then, do that. I'd say leave that, but maybe take out some of the middle there.
That could be, but that's the distinction.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes?
Listening to your discussion about this, there are 2 types of landscaping businesses currently in the township. One is what's being discussed here. One is people that do landscaping. They put in pavers, they don't actually have that retail component. Perhaps a clarification should simply be in this section as this is with retail. Because again, the people that do the landscaping consider themselves a landscaping business. They don't begin to need 10 acres to have a couple of trailers in which all of their equipment is inside those trailers. In fact, you have one business here in the hamlet where on their business website, they do landscaping and they are on a lot in the hamlet. And I think if you clarified that, I think it would be very helpful for those people.
Well, this section simply says that the landscape business can have a retail component. It essentially allows it as an accessory activity that's part of the landscaping business.
Again, I think though the requirements you're talking about are all if I have that component. They're not just for the guy that has a trailer full of equipment that he parks on his driveway. At least I hope not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe, I think getting the word retail in there would probably be.
As we're talking about the landscape business, to me, the difficulty I have is with it being potentially an intense commercial type business.
It can start out small.
In an agricultural
Yes, that's
residential
true.
zone. And I'm not comfortable with that, personally. And so, yet I recognize that
Well, let me play
in some
devil's advocate.
cases, it's almost accessory to a farm, other than the commercial aspect. Right, it's just the retail that changes the nature of the business.
We're gonna allow a guy to have a sod farm in a piece of property that's how big? Could be 2 acres in agricultural residential, so he's gonna have bulldozers, scraping equipment, 53-foot flatbeds rolling in and out of there. Okay? Here's a guy that wants to have some railroad ties, pile them up in his yard, throw them on a flatbed and drive out of there and go put them up at somebody's house sometime.
You're making a distinction between the districts. An agricultural district is basically defined as a growing district.
Okay.
You can have a nursery, for example, that grows product in an agricultural area. So it's growing as you go, corn or wheat or alfalfa, it's doing that. The distinction with the landscaping is that you're really not doing that. You're bringing something from the outside, assimilating it here, and then distributing it. More of a commercial operation as
Okay.
opposed to a pure growing as any agricultural operation really is.
But if the purpose is to restrict the size of the vehicle that's rumbling up and down your road or going in and out of a driveway, then these other things wouldn't ring true with that.
But we also have, we do have the right to Farm Act in Michigan that limits what we can say and regulate related to farming activities. These are not farming activities. These are other activities that would be common
Brought in on the outside.
or appropriate in the rural district, but they're not farming activities.
That does explain.
And you don't want it to go
Thank you.
too far.
Well, I mean, my proposal would be that where you have farming-like activities that relate to landscaping, that should be allowed in agricultural residential, because it's farming-like activities, but that the commercial side of this really should be managed consistent with a business district and included in the same, personally.
Okay, so perhaps split out this, kind of a landscape maintenance activity along the lines that Ms. Hamilton mentioned would be something that would be permitted in the ag district and have language that talks about that. It's not a retail activity, it's just, it's a maintenance, essentially maintenance business. And that this retail side would be a commercial, in the commercial district only. Is that the suggestion?
Right, but now, when I think of a business that's, I think you see some of them in the township where the person is running, in essence, a home-based business, but it acts more like a depot for equipment used in landscaping or snow removal or all of that. And I'm not sure what scale of that should be permitted in essence, a residential area.
Shouldn't be.
You run into that, that's a difficult question to answer, because both Rodney and I have dealt many times with individuals within communities that want to start, a business. They want to do snow plowing, they've got one truck. They want to do landscaping, they've got a pickup and a trailer and a front-end loader, something like that. It's only them. Okay, that's scale. The problem that we have to contend with is basically, we have to assume that a use may be well and good like that, but the intent of those people is to expand the use. They have 2 pickup trucks, they have 2 trailers, they have things of that nature, and at what point is it a real use that is an impact not only to the individual parcel, but also to the surrounding areas? And it's hard to make that distinction. And it comes down to an enforcement. We might say, a family-operated business, a home occupation can be this, which we have done in the ordinance. But to take the second step into the larger, pure commercial business is something that's very difficult sometimes to define, because it may start out small and then it gets very large, and the intent may not have been to be large, but the property owner had the opportunity or whatever to go large, to make more profit, something like that. And if you say that it's going to be large or small and then it gets large, at what point do you address that kind of an issue? It's true of almost any land use that can come into a community. It starts small and get big and then be a real problem. So what we're trying to do here is define it within that scope and perspective.
Yes.
Didn't we work on an ordinance already about regarding home-based businesses and the number of employees you can have? and-
Home occupations are in the ordinance, and we're distinguishing between a couple, sizes there where you might have a home-based, home occupation that would have, family and one employee, or if it gets bigger, you can have a couple employees. Yes, that is also.
You might think of this idea of landscape maintenance operations as, it is a home-based business, but we're calling it out separately because it has its own unique set of issues, outdoor storage and equipment being parked on
I'm
site. being
just wondering how and if it would overlap, that's
Well,
all.
home-based business, as Ronnie said, usually it's something where there is no evidence that the business is taking place because it's taking place in a single-family residence. No outdoor storage, no sign, a certain percentage of the property can be used, usually it's 20%, something of that nature. So it's defined specifically.
Could we go after that then? Not call it a retail landscape, call it home-based businesses that use equipment, would have to have trucks to move materials.
Well, I said a moment ago, it could be scale.
Right.
If you want to look at it from that perspective with a home-based business, a home occupation, that may be a possibility.
Let's call it
But
that.
then it begins to be, I think that's possible. Then it begins to be, an enforcement issue if it goes beyond what is described as a home-based business. Are you gonna go in if he does get the second truck, or if he does hire another employee, you say, all of a sudden, you are not a home-based business anymore.
Okay, but, so we need to, when we get to home-based businesses, we need to get more into that, I think. But from a landscape business, we're not talking about the home-based
This is
version
the
of a
full
landscape
operation.
business here that's proposed, right? And so what
This
I
is
would
the full
say
operation.
is that the only landscape business I would be comfortable with in a residential area is that fits the definition of a home-based business, personally.
Including the agricultural area. I mean, we're talking about the agricultural
Yeah.
residential district.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not personally, and I don't know how everyone else here is, but I wouldn't want to propose, commercial, retail, landscape businesses and that go beyond what's allowed by the Right to Farm Act in the agricultural residential district. Yes?
One question for where your discussion has gone is if I grow trees as part of an agricultural operation, and you had said you had, if I understood what you said, you had no issue with the growing of the trees, but your issue was the retail side of it. How do you envision that landowner, that person growing the product, how do you envision them selling it or moving it if I can't have any sales? Because again, trees are generally, a lot of trees are purchased right there on your property. If you have a Christmas tree farm, a lot of times you come in, you cut, people get to harvest them. So how do you envision it? I have to have I can't have any on the farm retail, I would have to go buy commercial property to sell my product?
No, I think whatever is permitted in the Right to Farm Act and what we allow for sales of farm products, right, in a agricultural property, I think that's fine.
Okay.
But what I see here is things that are not farms. Okay, this is broad enough that it talks about landscape materials, which could be pavers, which is, which is not things that are coming from that land or directly involved in the farming aspect of that operation.
So what I grow is, we're separating from those other materials then?
Well, I think, yeah.
Okay.
That's where my head's at, is that
That clarifies it, I did not understand that.
If you were not careful here, you could be permitting an extraction operation that was basically mining materials and selling it as landscape material, and I don't think that's, that you want to say that that's a right in an agricultural, or maybe it is.
No, you're right, we don't want to go there, and a lot of these activities have fine lines between them. That's what we're trying to address, make sure we're not unnecessarily prohibiting something that should be allowed in the district, but also try and draw the line so that we preserve the desired character of the township. And these are some of the activities that are tough to draw those lines. Landscape business, they're common. Many people like to start up a landscape business because they have the skills and it's fairly easy to do. And of course it encourages business activity in the community. So I mean, it's not something we want to prohibit, but we do need to be careful with it.
Do we have any businesses that we know of so far that don't fall within these parameters? That's including our adjustments, the 5 acres. I understand the concept of not wanting a big commercial enterprise, 365 days a year in a neighborhood. But I'm just do we know, Donna, do you know, is there something that's out there? Because if we create something,
I think the rock shop started out as highway commercial.
It was an activity allowed in the commercial.
Well, you kind of got out of hand. Also, one other thing, you're talking about a pickup truck, and a prime example is right there, right behind the Wright House. He's got trailers and stuff that, should install stuff in a residential area. It started out with a limousine service, one, and then it became a whole bunch, and then he sold it to a guy that installed, I don't know what he does, but he's got trailers and trucks parked there. That's a prime example of disregard for home occupation and what he's talking about. You buy one pickup truck and the next thing you got 5.
well, there's a couple that I can think of, but I haven't paid close enough attention, like it's nothing that's jumped right out at
And
me,
that was one, it's not really
as
legal.
being violators.
Because it's not really home occupation when you got more than 2 or 3 trucks, that are installing windows and stuff, parked outside, right behind your lighter house. I don't know if that's legal, but it doesn't seem to me like it's legal. And so what he's saying, and that's true. I mean,
Then it comes down to the enforcement.
yes.
It is, because these businesses grow slowly, and obviously they're making their own private decisions, it's not easy to catch up with that kind of thing. Eventually some complaints, but it can take a while.
Wait a second, what happens when you do complain?
The question was, what happens when you do complain?
I've been complaining about 2 backhoes sitting down there on residential property for 5 years, when it should be across the street on Rotunda's property, in 5 years. That's residential property, and it's got 2 it's a full-service backhoe company. They don't ever move, but they're still there. It doesn't seem, how are you gonna enforce something
Okay.
that gets out of hand?
So,
With regards to
someone to draft this where it's a little less commercial.
It sounds like what we're looking at here is in the agricultural district, we're going to allow us a type of landscape business, but at a smaller scale, no retail activity. And then this broader retail-oriented landscape business would be something in the commercial district.
That's what we need to see.
We'll make that change.
Sorry it took so long. All right. One last chance on point 107. No,
So we're gonna take the area
all right.
down to 5
108.
acres?
Yeah, we'll work on it. So 108 is the tree growing nursery activity. This is really something that's very close to farming activity. Essentially, it's a tree nursery.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Anyone else have an issue, a question there? All right, we're good.
Okay. 40.109, this is the equestrian activities, riding arenas, boarding stables, and non-farm keeping of animals.
Where does that show up in the usage table?
It actually,
I see it.
Yeah, we
It's
have
like halfway down.
Yeah, the keeping of
Riding
animals,
areas,
non-farm.
boarding stables, and non-farm keeping of animals.
Yeah,
Which is it's listed as keeping of animals non-farm,
right.
just above counts. permitted use in RCAR and ER on page 20-3.
No, this is,
I thought GAMS allowed, you get so many animals on 2 acres and then 1 additional animal for up to 10 acres. I thought as long as the animals were maintained under GAMS and they did not become a nuisance, that the number wasn't as important.
Those
The,
are the non-farm keeping animals, correct?
Yeah, that's
Right.
So that would be different.
right, this is, it's another fine line is what it is. Non-farm keeping of animals, we're regulated under the zoning ordinance. If you're a farming operation, you know, dairy farm or whatever, that you're not covered by this section. The equestrian GAMP standard does not set a limitation on animals per acre or anything like that. It basically is covering a larger scale. This is basically saying that on those parcels under 10 acres, that there are some limitations, but once you get above 10 acres, your farm and the GAMP standards apply, period. No matter what you call yourself, if you have more than 10 acres, you have animals, you're a farm. I think I believe these standards were carried over from the current ordinance, and we're trying to incorporate some of that language into this.
I just think, I wasn't sure if we would put what a limit on.
Planting of trees, growing.
It's a non-farm, that's essentially what we're
Okay,
saying.
I'm living in a low density residential district in 7 acres. Well, I can, that allows for,
We're reading carefully,
7
so
horses.
I can understand.
or conceivably.
It will take the
that-
time.
Why couldn't I have 10? Good call.
I mean,
Yeah, you know, that's,
this is an area, and, you know, the question was, why are we limiting these small parcels? And we don't have to, we could just say the GAMP standards apply, go comply with them and be done with it. But in the current ordinance, there were these provisions that, sort of formula that was set for these small parcels. And what we basically are doing here is saying that these smaller parcels, these limitations apply.
I recall very clearly the intense level of discussion in the township when the existing regulations came into being.
There's a lot of compromise that
Yes,
goes
there
into
was.
this. And so we didn't want to toss that compromise out. What I will say is that if a landowner came in and they have 5 acres and they want to have 20 horses, and they say they have a way to meet, to care for those horses and meet the GAMP standards, and they want to make a fight out of it, that'd be new law, because there's no case law related to that yet.
All I would like to be able to do personally here, my thinking is we ought to be able to say this is exactly what the current ordinance allows. And if we're there, I'm okay with it. Does anyone disagree?
I'm still stuck back on 108, guys, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of how I want to even ask this question.
We can always step back to say, I mean, we're not, we can step back if we need to at some point, or even, like I said, even with a revised document, there'll be another time to discuss. Because when we're done with this, we're gonna present you with a revised ordinance. And so we can.
Then I'm just gonna throw out the what if under 40.108, and you guys can think on that. Right? How's that? Let's say this is Hamilton back there wants to grow trees and sell trees. And she uses a barn for these trees somehow, for loading them under a covered roof or something. Under 2, any building or structure located on the parcel shall be secondary and incidental to the raising and growing of nursery products, and may only be used for the storage of equipment and materials necessary for such raising or growing of such site or on parcels under the same ownership used for the same purpose. What's the root of that?
You're concerned that we're prohibiting her from having other farm buildings on the property?
Yeah, if all of a sudden she's a nursery, that means any building.
I think we need to be specific there. I think we need to say any non-farm structure, basically. Because we're not trying to prohibit other farm buildings or other activities. Say, just make it have a nursery and have a dairy farm or crop farming or whatever. That's not, there's no intent there.
Trucks, trailers, or other equipment not used for on-site nursery operation shall be prohibited.
The key here again is attempting to keep this operation from becoming something that is a nuisance in the neighborhood. As we've talked about with the landscape business, the same issues apply here. And so these standards are intended to put some guardrails around the activity to ensure it remains within the character of the agricultural residential
Okay,
district.
well, Linda Hamilton lives on her property, and I bet she has a pickup truck that she'd never used to haul a tree, and she'd just go to Kroger with it. She's not allowed to have that pickup truck. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, and we can say it's otherwise permitted in the district for that. I mean, like I said, the intent is simply to avoid the gravel hauling operation or whatever other nuisance condition often comes up.
and so if Linda wants to sell trees, according to one, she has to go through a site plan.
If she wants to have outside sales of nursery products, yes.
That's nursery products that are brought in, is that what we're saying? Or what is that? Define unprocessed prepared nursery products.
Basically, if she's having on-site retail sales, what we're saying is you need to come with a site plan to show us how you're going to do with parking and all those things that come with having members of the public come onto your property to purchase things.
Okay, but what is an unprocessed / prepared nursery product?
I think, as you mentioned, trees would be one of those.
All farms have to sell their product by its very nature. The federal government says you cannot be a farm unless you make a profit every 3 to 5 years. So we sell milk, the truck has to come in and get the milk. A semi comes every day. We sell grass-fed beef. Somebody has to come in and pick up the steers to go to market. If I sell trees, and I haven't yet, we haven't at least, I want to clarify that, we haven't for 50 years logged our woods, but when we sell our trees, it's no different. The truck has to come in and get the trees, and I don't have to have a site plan to have the truck come in and get my trees now. So I appreciate Bart's trying to make, there is a distinction again between retail sales where the general public's walking in and the selling of agricultural products.
One thing to keep
And it's not clear under what's written.
One thing to keep in mind is that this is not a farm activity. Christmas tree farming is a farm. You know, if you're selling Christmas trees, if you have Christmas trees, if you're growing them on your property, that's a farm. As far as the state is concerned, there are GAMP standards associated with that. And our roadside stand provisions would allow a Christmas tree stand to be a type of roadside stand. So if it's a farming operation like that, that's covered. What we're talking about is nursery grown trees of the type that would be then transported somewhere else and planted somewhere else. And that's what the definition of a nursery is. That's what these standards are intended to apply for. So we're not talking about something that qualifies under the Right to Farm Act as a farming operation. That's why this is called out separately from farming. So I think that's the distinction here. So if you want to have an on-site sale area where somebody can come and buy a tree and take it and haul it off and plant it in their yard, then you need to deal with the site plan.
So they can come onto my property, we can cut down a tree and give it to them just fine. They can't come onto my property and buy a tree, root ball and all, and leave it without me having a site plan, proper parking, and all these extra.
I don't have any control over the Right to Farm Act. I have no control over the GAMP standards and what those exempt from township control.
You need to look at the definition of nursery.
There's a definition.
Look at the definition of nursery, it's on page 2-40.
But what we're doing is we're defining
I just went there
non-farm
myself.
activities and
Yeah,
farm.
not
That's
something-
clear.
Makes-
Hopefully
it-
help me
it-
along.
What a nursery
It
is.
really explains what a nursery operation is.
Okay.
And it definitely excludes Christmas trees, soils, landscape, and such.
All right, dude. There, you guys are looking?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll give you a second to do that. I got ahead of you, I was up down to the next section, quite honestly. And, you know, just while they're looking, I mean, to me, the nursery makes perfect sense in agricultural residential, right? Particularly if, as long as it's not large industrial type operation, I suppose, if it's farm oriented in the way that it appears, right? But, and the landscape business to me is beyond the nursery, is the commercial activity that needs to be in the commercial area, which is kind of what my first observation was.
And certainly, some communities have divided that way, others have essentially allowed the full range to happen on the one site. And the business, both business models exist. I have a friend that's in the business model of, he has his agriculture operation here and his retail operation here. And I know others that have that all together. So either, we can certainly set it up in either form, and we'll look at it as the two separate types of.
I think that's in keeping with the way our landscaping businesses have really been done here in the township today.
Yep. Well, other questions
All
on
right, are we okay down there now?
I'm much better, thank you.
Okay, good.
I guess, well, we're on 40.109, which is the riding arenas, boarding stables.
I don't have it, again, my only point here would be as long as it's consistent with what's in the current ordinance, then I'm happy. Anyone else? Okay.
40.110, roadside stands. I do have one note here that we're going to take care of. There was a question about firewood sales. We have residents who toss cords of firewood out, or have a little rack, and we're going to define that as an incidental residential activity. Basically, it's not a roadside stand, it's not a home occupation, it's just a part of being a residence that you can have some cords of wood out in your driveway to sell them in the proper season, so that can be taken care of.
Did you say cords?
Okay, so again,
I have firewood side.
the definition of a roadside stand, right, is a temporary building or structure. Okay. I'm okay. Any questions related to that? I don't think so.
Last one here is 40.111, which is veterinary clinics and hospitals.
Veterinary clinics are conditional use in A&R.
Yes.
Yeah, and that, I mean, we have many examples of those in the township. Okay.
Horses.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was gonna say.
Keeping an animal, within the principal building, what about a horse? The one building, they're usually outside. And a vet.
Once again, what's the purpose behind it?
Most vets for large animals go to to the facility. You don't usually take your horse and a trailer to a veterinary.
You do,
That's
but
it.
you
Some
do
kids
for a
just have
Coggins
horses
test,
come
you're gonna
over
sell
there.
them.
I mean, O'Neill brings horses up there all the time, but it's just simply to do the procedure that needs to be done,
Mhm.
and then he's out.
They're
They're
out
not
there back
staying
in their own
there,
stable.
you know, right.
Okay.
It's not.
Right.
What's the
Yeah.
purpose behind it?
The purpose is essentially related to the effects on the surrounding area. That's really what it comes down to, is that this ensures that the operation remains at a level that it doesn't cause trouble for its next door neighbor.
Okay, so could it be a building, not principal building?
Certainly could.
Wouldn't he have to come for a site plan review?
Yes.
Mhm.
And just, you know, animals have to be housed.
Are you guys okay down there? All right.
Brings us to the end of that
Well,
section.
You know, we can take about another 20 minutes, and then we're gonna have to call it a night.
All right, the next section, residential uses. First one is 41-201, accessory dwelling. This is the section talking about what Ms. Hamilton was referring to about a herdsman house or essentially an accessory dwelling in the to an agricultural activity. This is, I think, where we will add that. We'll add language that deals with that issue in the area that she's talking about. So right now, the standards here basically apply to non-residential accessory dwellings, but we'll add that in for the farm activity.
Okay. Any questions there? I don't think so. Okay.
Okay. Bed and breakfast inn, 40.202. These standards are we basically carried over from the current ordinance.
I don't have a problem there. Anyone else? You okay? I guess we're okay. I don't know, the guys are talking about bed and breakfast, or?
Yeah, where are we moving to now, fire, labor? We're good. We're okay.
You're okay, all right.
All right, 40.203, farm labor housing. As was mentioned, this is kind of the migrant labor housing. It's not an individual unit. That's more for large commercial farm operations. And they get carried over, I think, primarily from the current ordinance.
Any questions? I don't think so. Home occupation.
All right, 40.204, home occupations.
Can I ask why the setbacks are larger than the regular house?
I think the intent here is to ensure that this housing is not, is located well back from the property lines. And that's basically it. That's
Why?
because of.
Maybe it's the original farmhouse that's 30 feet from the side property line. Now you're telling you can't use it for farm labor housing. Let's get rid of that. Get it out of there.
You have basically you have the issue that you know, if we're going by the straight setbacks, you can put, I mean, this is drafted essentially a 4-unit building right next to a single-family home in the next property over. That's the only, and they said, like I said, this was from the current ordinance, we just carried it over, and there's not a whole lot of regulation that the township has in this area, because some of this is regulated by the state. But the intent, I think, is to keep this activity more into the interior of the property. Although, from just to cover the other side, that does mean we're essentially putting these things on the farmland. I mean, it is taking up land that could otherwise be put into agriculture.
Did you find out what the minimum state requirement is and come back?
They don't really cover setbacks, certainly. They're really only covered.
Then I'd make it no different than what the house is.
Well, we can simply state that, that the number of units and such have to match what, you basically split. If you want to have farm labor houses, split a 2-acre lot and put a house on it. We could, you can do that right now. You can divide off a 2-acre lot and put a house on it. But the intent here is to set up temporary housing. This is not intended to be full year, and the standards are a little different.
Seasonal.
I understand your thought, but I'm saying,
What's the intent of putting it far into the interior? I mean, if it's a single family dwelling.
but it's not necessarily a single-family dwelling. This allows more than one unit. If you have a large farm operation, you can have several units. And the issue is basically that you're putting what could be a 3 or 4 unit building next door to some single-family home that's not part of that farm operation. And is that, I mean, that is the potential impacts between the two properties that are the reason for the larger setback.
Linda, can I implicate you again?
No, it was what Rodney said, the comment that you could simply split it off and put housing on there is not true, because that's not the only requirement that the township has for your 2-acre minimum. So if I don't have 150 feet of road frontage, I don't have a 4-to-1 ratio, I can't necessarily, his comments aren't necessarily true.
Septic field.
That's
Right.
right, so
And
again,
I agree.
the migrant housing is important. And I just want to clarify, it's important you can have it on the same parcel, because the conditions don't necessarily exist to do the split.
And I agree, I apologize, it really, I didn't finish my comment. Well, you can do that, that's not a practical way to do that for the type of housing we're talking about here. It's simply,
I'm just, I could see the old farmhouse that's right tight to the road becoming the house for the migrant workers, and, you know, a newer structure being built elsewhere that still is the primary residence within the correct setbacks being built for the owners. And because of something that says it has to be 75 feet from a sideline is restricted.
well, we could require that this type of housing is located behind the principal dwelling on the property. I mean, we can require something like that.
For the purpose of?
Well, again, the key is that this could be a potentially multiple family unit. And while it's intended to only be occupied part of the year, it's still potentially, on large properties, it's potentially a multiple family unit. It's not a single family home. Although that's probably the more common way to do it. And we're dealing with the single family home part, this other section.
Okay, so it's not offensive to the, I don't want to, I know I'm coming off combative to you tonight, and trust me, I love what you do for this.
And
But
I
now,
appreciate
okay,
it.
we're saying we put it behind the primary residence, then, or not in front, then okay, it's not offensive to maybe, or if it is even offensive to begin with, by an opinion, it's not offensive to the person that's across the street, now it's offensive to the person that's next door, but set their house 500 feet back from the road. Now he has to look at this. You know, I mean, why don't we say the structure has to be nice and in keeping with residential, you know, expectations or something like that, or go after the problem.
One interesting comment this evening. One of the things that you have to guard against in this situation is you could be building a dwelling that at some point in the future would have no relation to a farm operation at all. And that's not the intent, because that raises a whole bunch of other issues.
Sure.
The only, as I recall, and Linda probably knows this specifically, the only large operation in this county that has farm labor housing is, as I recall, it's the Do Russell farm out in Freedom Township, and they have a huge acreage out there, and you go in, and there's very, very small little houses right in a row. That's basically a bedroom and a little kitchen and someplace to sit down, which is enough for the migrant workers that come in each season to do whatever it is. If we get into the situation where we're really building a single-family dwelling by all characteristics, then I think we may have long-term implications, and we don't really want to do that.
I have very dear friends of mine that live up in Clare. And the original farmhouse on that property, on the, I think they own a square mile there and then a couple others, well over 1,000 acres. The original farmhouse is for the people that are there to handle their livestock and to farm the fields. And it's 30 feet off the road. And it's the cutest little farmhouse, river rock, stone, it's beautiful. And I just pictured that as somebody saying, you know what, I have to kick my farm labor out of this because, out of here because they don't meet the requirement of that, farmhand living in it because it doesn't have the proper setback.
Well, I think that we're going to get at that. This is what Ms. Hamilton was talking about earlier about the herdsman house and having some kind of accessory dwelling allowed related to a farm. So you essentially can have your principal residence for the owner of the farm. You can have this accessory dwelling, herdsman or whatever it might be used for, whoever might be in there. We're going to get at that through that accessory dwelling section we just looked at a moment ago. So that's really going to be another type of potential farm labor housing. It's not this one. This is that migratory. This is what Don was essentially just describing. We're going to have a separate option for that. So I think we're going to get it where you want to go.
Now we can pick because of what job that person's doing on the farm?
I guess let me,
It's migratory.
Bart, I think, let us bring something back to you on that. I think we're going to cover the ground you're looking at, and we'll cover that, and let's show you what we okay.
All right, thanks.
Where did we end up here?
We're okay to move on.
Okay.
Tell you what you want to hear, man. It's all good. I'm
The
okay.
questions are important questions. I'm not.
I appreciate that.
any of it.
40.204 home
So
occupations?
I think we're ready for 204. And what I did was I read the definition of home occupation, right? Because I think you have to do that with these, otherwise you end up reading the wrong interpretation, right? And so it basically says any business, occupation, or activity undertaken for compensation within a dwelling unit that is incidental and secondary to use of the structure as a dwelling unit, okay? And so, to me, when I read that, right, running a landscaping business out of your house is not a home occupation, because the business isn't undertaken within the dwelling unit.
Right, it requires equipment and, yes. That's why we would suggest we have a separate activity called out for that.
I have a question.
Then we have a list of permitted home occupations here, and I don't have any questions, I'm okay. Just,
I brought this up in 2001. That's home occupation, it's awful broad.
I'm just having trouble hearing you.
It's awful broad, and it seems to have a way for people to circumvent it, like over here. And it's not precise enough. Other townships have different numbers, like an A, a B, and a C. Once we got home occupation, things have kind of got out of hand in the township where people are running full-size businesses out of their house. More than one place that does windows. I know you folks drive down 6 Mile, and there's a lot of places that are not doing, it's not inside, it's, like you said, they got pickup trucks and trailers and all kind of stuff parked in the driveway. It's,
Mike, just essentially what this does is it has an A and a B. A is the activities that are specifically permitted here, like the home offices and music, dance, and arts and craft classes, which is actually straight out of the state law, studios and workshops. Those things are, you might call them home occupation A. That's permitted by right. You don't need a permit. As long as you're consistent with this section, you're fine. What you might call the home occupation B is at the top of page 15, where it says any home occupation not specifically listed may be approved by the planning commission with a conditional use permit. And so anything that doesn't fit under this specific list needs a conditional use permit to exist. And so if they are operating without a conditional use permit, they're in violation of the ordinance, period.
And then we point out there's a list of 10 things, right, that are prohibited as home occupations.
You can't put out a single sign.
that's what I said in 2001, you could have anything in Salem Township except number 6.
I mean, if I were to be, I'd turn the ordinance around and I'd say if you have an approved home-based occupation, you have to have a sign, not that you could have a sign.
Well, actually, you can have a sign. What it says for
Well,
signs.
I understand, but what I'm saying is, if we approve something as a home-based occupation, it shouldn't be optional to have a sign, it should be required to have a sign so that everybody knows that that is in fact a home-based occupation that's approved.
What the ordinance says is the only signs you can have are those that are allowed for the residents. So for example, you can have a nameplate, which is a type of sign permitted by the ordinance that had the name of the business on it. And you know, I mean, it's not much, but it is allowed. And the reason is entirely is because the intent is not to change the character of the residents. If the business grows to the point where they need permanent signage, they probably also reach the point where they should be looking for another space.
Oh, and I understand that requiring the sign's not the right thing to do. But, and just me personally, that would make it easier for the neighbors to understand that it's been through the process.
Yeah.
I don't.
Just the signs that's permitted.
Okay, there any other questions related to home-based occupations, or are we good to move on? We got about 5 more minutes here, and we're going to call it quits for the night on this and try and clean up the rest of the agenda. All right, let's keep going.
All right, I would skip the next one, move all the way to page 20. We simply have nothing we can say about manufactured housing parks. We carried the language over from the current ordinance. If we change it, we have to send it all off to the state to have them approve it. But if we just carry over what's in the current ordinance, we don't have to deal with that. And so I would just pretend that doesn't exist. It's in the ordinance, but leave it as it is. And so I moved to page 20, which is section 40.206, multiple family housing.
Yep. And that's only permitted in MR as a district.
Right.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Under 6A2, I'm assuming you're going to make similar adjustments to the shingles and roof materials as you do in the previous.
That's a good catch, thank you. Yep, we will do that. All right. Next, 40.207.
It fits right in with whatever the discussion we had earlier, right? We should make it consistent with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
The last section in this is 40.207, single and two-family dwellings.
the end is in sight.
5C needs to have the same.
Yeah,
We'll match
toss
that,
out there.
yep. Note on there already.
Stop there.
Didn't we
I
go
have a
through-
question.
We've been through this.
I have a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
Why number 4 in single and two-family dwelling standards? Is there a minimum, this is a minimum of 1,200 square feet for any house that's built in what districts?
And all of
The
them.
whole,
Everything.
and why is that requirement? I mean, my first house was quite a bit smaller than that, and especially with today, you know, a lot of people are building small houses today. They're very nice, they're energy efficient. I mean, there's people building 400 square foot houses. So why do we have a minimum of 1,200? If they buy a 2-acre parcel, I mean, they own this nice big parcel of land, and then they're, you know, bound to put a 1,200 square foot house in if they don't meet that.
My 3-bedroom ranch is 1,080.
Yeah, I mean, this is a policy of the township.
And
This is carried over from the current
When it's
ordinance.
floor area, is that combined for both any floors? Or is this a plan area?
No, if you have a 2-story home, it's the total floor area.
So it's not a footprint, is what you're
No,
saying?
that's correct.
Well, it could be, is it considered the living space? Basement isn't considered living space.
Right, would not include the basement. It's basically,
It has to be taxable square footage, living space.
This
So-
is a common regulation. In all the communities that I know of, the smallest allowed is 1,000 square feet. So this is a carryover, as Rodney mentioned, 1,200. Certainly with some of the activities ongoing today, the size of houses, you know, you can build a house for 1,000, you can build some really nice houses below that that are quite unique and have a distinct character. But this is simply a requirement that's been accepted where if you have a residential development come in, it's kind of an assurance that the people that build, you know, the normal size houses, shall we say, would not be impacted by someone that comes in and builds some very small house that may not have character, that may not be desirable for the entire neighborhood. It's a uniform kind of characteristic.
I think, you know, getting back, as we talked earlier about the history of this and how this started really out of single wide mobile home units being put on lots. I think the origin of this requirement was intended to ensure that single wide mobile homes wouldn't meet the standard. And required at the very least that it be a modular, double wide or a home or something equivalent for manufacturing side. And as I said, it applies now no matter what type of construction because we can't differentiate. But it still has that same effect of saying that the home has to have a minimum size to be similar character to other homes in the community. What that minimum size is a policy decision. As Don said, 1,000 square foot, I think is sort of the low end, the common. And we've seen a few that have gone a little higher than 1,200. But that, you know, this number is fairly common regulation.
I just want to say, it just seems a little disturbing that the township would be telling people what size houses they have to live in as a policy. It's just, I mean, if somebody wants to live in a 600 square foot house, then
Okay, let me
I don't think there's going to be a rush of people.
Oh, I know, I could think of a house on Curtis Road that's probably not between 5 Mile and Brookville on the
It's for
west
sale
side,
now, isn't it?
east side, that's probably 800 square feet.
If a guy can only afford a 1,000 square foot house,
it's
he
for
wants to
sale
build it
now.
on property that he inherited, and he's gonna live here and pay
Let's
taxes.
let's
Dang, let him
emphasize
build the
one
house.
thing in this discussion. As Rodney said, this goes back I was writing regulations like this many years ago, and it was a time, as he said, when you could not disallow a, call them a motor home, on an individual parcel. In understanding that regulation, some of the things in this ordinance and every other ordinance around here, the effort was to try and make any dwelling that was to be outside of a mobile home park resemble a single-family dwelling with a pitched roof, foundation, and a size. And the size was deliberately put in because if it was not here and the regulation exists that you could bring a mobile home out onto a single-family parcel, theoretically you could bring something that would be a little camper, basically out on a single-family parcel. And the regulation here would disallow that happening. You know, so that if you had areas out in the township, you wouldn't have a proliferation of the very small, call them trailers, call them manufactured, houses that are very small, perhaps unappropriate or inappropriate to the adjoining neighbors. That's the basis of what this is all about.
Basically, to give you an idea, a 14, a single wide mobile home unit, 14 by 70, which is about as long as you can make it, is 980 square feet. That's one of the reasons why this number was set above 1,000, was to ensure that it would be a double wide home, so it would have the pitched roof, so it would have more of the character of a stick.
Do we allow, according to our ordinance right now, a mobile home to be put on a single residential lot? And
we cannot differentiate between by the type of construction. We have to differentiate based on the character and the visual appearance of the unit. We can't differentiate between manufactured housing and stick-built housing.
So this wording really isn't necessary anymore, is it?
No, it absolutely is.
It's more so.
I had
Yeah.
a call this week, a gentleman wanted to know if he could build a 300 square foot house in this township.
And I work
I
with
mean,
communities
this
right
is
now.
what he wants to build, a 300 square foot house.
I work with rural communities where we're still seeing single wide mobile homes being brought in.
That's less than 20 by 20.
It happens.
Yes, that's what he wants.
The real fear is that would happen if this regulation was not.
I
Someone
understand.
would bring in a very small mobile home and put it on a single lot.
Okay, so we understand the intent, and I suppose I think we should move on and recognize we can go through a public hearing process, and that gives us time to consider if this isn't the right place to draw the line in the sand. Fair enough? Yes, Mr. Horton?
My brother lives in Tracy City, Tennessee, and it has no zoning, and there's people who are living in 20-foot long trailers on lots with plywood additions made.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And they
I understand.
live there year-round.
I have no problem, I drive around the state, you see examples of that all over in many townships. And we don't have a preponderance of that here, we may not have any of it here, although,
And this is one of the reasons.
I understand. And I don't think we want to change the nature of the community.
Yeah, it's one of those places where, would it be better to be clear and simply say, we don't want single-wide mobile homes, don't put them there? That's where this started, but unfortunately, the courts have said, case law has said we can't do that.
Well, personally, I believe that they've developed mobile home parks for the purpose of accommodating those types of uses, and I think that's the right way to do it. I really do. Okay. I think we've got to wind up the evening's activities. We're not done with section 40, right? We missed a few things.
But we're close. Actually, the commercial section is the longest section left, and we certainly can easily wrap it up next time, I suspect.
Okay. All right. So if I look at our agenda, which it seems ambitious now, in retrospect. Right? I would propose that we postpone discussing the schedule to complete until we get through the rest of section 40. Okay? But I would like to make sure that we get right into this at the next planning commission meeting and clean up all the open sections, if we can. Which would be the April 15th meeting, I believe. And is it possible that we'll see the editorial changes from this evening in a cleaned up section? Like we redid with the general commercial, or would you say that what we've done this time is minor enough that it doesn't need that level of rewrite?
I think that, with your permission, what I'd like to do is make the changes to the industrial materials and make sure that Mr. Horton and the others interested parties see them, so they are aware that we made them. But to hold off on providing revisions to you until we get all the way done. I'd rather give you, generally, I'd rather give you the whole book at once with the changes. So we aren't repeating ourselves and looking at them over and over again.
All right, I agree to that. So we'll see in writing, in essence, your notes consolidating the revisions we're talking about, right? And then we'll go through the rest of the sections that we need to touch on. And I'm hopeful that that will get us to a good working draft to consider taking to public hearing. Because we need to move this process along and get it into the arena for open public comment, and then if we can get through that, move it forward to the township board for consideration for approval. And we'll put the dates on that, but for right now, the end is far enough away, we're going to devote as much time as possible in the next regular meeting. Okay. I think we're done with 8, and now I would like to go to the short discussion on training. And we have an outline from Mr. Pennington that he sent in well, really it's from Mr. Pennington and from Mr. Danny, right? And there's no question that we have enough people here who are fairly new that a number of these topics listed by Mr. Pennington as an opportunity for, let's call it, training, where we're presented with some professional insight and have an opportunity to ask questions and really discuss our roles and how to go through things. Strikes me as it would be of value, but I don't want to, but we need to agree as a planning commission that we want to take on the time required to go through some of these items here. And what I need right now is I think we need to say, what priority do we want to place on this? And I'm looking for ideas from someone here this evening. It's one of the planning commissioners.
I think this is a wonderful idea, and I think that it's hugely important and that we should give it high priority.
Okay, all right, so it's not just me. I think we've got a genuine interest here. So now it strikes me as the next thing we need to do is decide how much time we're going to devote to this and with what degree of urgency, and then prioritize what's most important. So here's what I have a suggestion, okay? And I think we're going to be busy in the April meeting, but I would like to suggest that we tentatively plan on 45 minutes in the May meeting to address a couple of these subjects, okay? And what I'd like to do and then let's think of it as 45 minutes and then a month off and then another 45-minute session the second month after. And so I would like a recommendation that we can discuss at our next meeting to say, okay, these are the topics we'd like to touch on in the first session. Yes?
One of the, under number 1 is a joint workshop meeting with the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission to delineate, duties and responsibilities. And I think with the new members and with have a new Board of Trustees, that this should be probably one of your first things is to set up a joint meeting and do a training session. And then the navigation of the new zoning ordinance, as we get closer to the end of that process and you're more familiar with going through and looking at timing, I think that would be an easy 45-minute session to have towards the end of when we get through the zoning ordinance. But I would put the joint workshop as a high priority. I think you need a training session. You have new members, you want to know what you're allowed to do. What happens when you get a site plan? What parameters are you allowed to review it under? We know it's a zoning ordinance, but can you make suggestions above and beyond, and what your limitations are?
Okay, I think,
Or what
and
they
so,
can be expanded to.
I agree, that's very good. So if we do that, then how do we want to go about scheduling it? Because the Planning Commission and the Township Board don't necessarily meet on the same date, and I don't know if this would be a special meeting, or...
Yeah, it probably would be a special meeting. I think TJ would have to take it back to the board, and maybe they can come up with a couple of dates. We can bring it back here and determine what would work for both boards, and go from there.
Okay, so I agree we should do that and start that process if TJ would do that for us. Right? But I think concurrent to that, we still want to set aside time in our main meeting to tackle the ones that we can do independently.
Sure, I agree. I think that
Is that fair? Yes, Mr. Kim.
If we're talking about doing this during the regular planning commission meetings, is that something that fits the charter of this planning commission? During the regular meeting?
Absolutely.
It does? Okay. Not that I use it in my investment type stuff that I do for work and at home, but payback. We're talking 20 minutes, meeting for 18 months. It's a 3-year term for a planning commissioner. Are those 18 months spent going to make us 20 minutes more efficient for the remaining 18 months?
Well, some topics may be 20 minutes, some may be closer to 45. My suggestion is we block up 45 and see where we are.
Do we strongly feel that we're going to make that back in? I'm assuming the goal of this is meeting efficiency and decision-making and clarity of decisions and better phrased questions and things like that. So do we think we'd get out of it with a constantly rotating planning commission?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's really just the same as with your, every month you receive the planning and zoning news, and it has certain topics in it, and those are the topics that are covered. You can read up on those if you wish, but it doesn't cover everything you need to know as a planning commissioner. The ongoing process of training is really in many ways better than sort of going to a conference and immersing yourself for 3 days in it, because you are getting regular activity rather than sort of once a year and not having anything again for another year.
Did you have an alternate proposal?
No, I was just simply asking those questions. If it's believed that we're going to get something out of it that makes it worthwhile, and as long as it fits what we're permitted to do during this meeting, I'll say during township time, member time.
I mean, we certainly could set it up in a 2-hour session, a 2.5 hour session, and cover a lot of ground in that. So if there's interest in that, we can certainly do it that way.
We've done it both ways. There are advantages to designating an entire meeting, to go over all these topics, because there's interaction between the topics. There's questions that come up we found that if you say 45 minutes or 20, normally that 20 is gonna go into 45, because there's gonna be questions, and then that question is gonna necessitate another question, just like going through the industrial. You know, that took more time. It is not uncommon to have a special meeting just to do this. You know, some type of training, presentation, comments, questions.
Okay. One other question I'll ask related to this, are you familiar with the MTA publications related to the Planning Commission and Planning and Zoning? Are they of value for the planning commissioners to have as reference?
I think anything, as you make reference to here, is of value to the planning commission. There's some very good handouts, there's some very good materials that are available that can be utilized most effectively by planning commission. So anything like that, you know, I think is most important.
Okay.
Sometimes when you read through that, it will necessitate additional questions or, you know, explanation that may be helpful after, you know, certain things are read. Sometimes a topic is covered very generally, but it may not be a topic that has direct relation to what we're doing in this community. You know, there's topics for cities, there's topics for charter townships, there's topics for regular townships, etc. You know, and there's distinctions that you should be aware of, because all townships are not like all cities. You know, there's major differences between them. But when you're reviewing a site plan, for example, a conditional use, or going through a rezoning, master plan kinds of things, there's a great number of similarities.
Okay. Well, with that kind of a recommendation, I think we should investigate getting those publications, and so that the planning commissioners have the benefit of being able to go through them.
Sure.
You know, and so maybe Don and I can work out what we would need to get and the best way to do it, and see if that fits our funding plan. But to me, I love reference books, okay? And anything that kind of helps get you grounded in, let's say, the appropriate way to operate, that you can go back and thumb to, I think is of value to the type of job we're trying to do here.
I think
Yes, Darrell?
there's two here that I look at, like ordinance enforcing. I don't know, do we enforce the ordinances, or is there someone in the township that would go out and do it? Or like the planning commission bylaws, I think Sandy could hand them out to the board for us to review the way we're supposed to operate and where we're supposed to act.
I can make everyone a copy of the
And make a copy to give to everybody prior. This should be this could wind up being a no-brainer. It wouldn't take 45 minutes at all. I think 4, you know, and then item 3 is another one. I don't see myself as going out and telling the guy over here that, hey, you got too many vehicles parked by the ordinance.
I agree.
You know?
I think, you know, if I were to think about it, I would say that what would be of value would be to understand what the township's policy is regarding ordinance enforcement and such, and know that all aspects of the township have been thought through, and be aware, because we get questions all the time here, and we should be just informed as to what that is. And I think that the township board may, if they have not already, they would benefit from a discussion on how ordinance enforcement is going to operate in the township. I mean, that's my observation. And I don't think we need to do that for them. I think that this is more a township board-centric discussion, but we would benefit from knowing that it happened, personally.
To me, number 1 seems to be, would take the longest amount of, time to cover and cover it right. But those other ones seem to be like,
Well, I agree
give us
with
the
it.
direction, and that's the way we,
The items
or whatever.
up under number 1 and number 2 strike me as most important, and number 4 is certainly of value to us, but it's also very simple because the bylaws are only about, you know, a dozen pages or so. I have them here, and if you read them, I think that the only thing that would come of it is we might read through them and say, oh, maybe we would like to make some adjustments. But I don't, you know, it's a good set of bylaws.
That may be a good place to start, quite frankly, is with the bylaws for the May meeting, and then look at one of these other items for July. Just because that is.
Okay, well, we have a lot of ideas, right? And I said, next meeting, we'll firm up the elements we're gonna discuss in a 45-minute section on our May meeting. Okay, and so I think we've got everybody going along there. Now, item 10 is approval of minutes from March 4th, 2013. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from March 4th, 2013 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. We've approved the minutes. Okay, we're down to reports and announcements. The first item I wanted to just talk about is the Planning Commission owes an annual report to the Board of Trustees. And it's almost time to do that. And I heard that perhaps we had a draft because the report is more a summary of what the activities have been. Is that true?
We've done it both ways.
I guess it's just a matter of, we deciding who's gonna actually generate the report,
Okay.
either myself or Mr. Pennington.
We've done it both ways.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
We've done it both ways in the past. It's something that you've gotta do. It's gotta be a record. And it doesn't have to be elaborate, it can just be a summary of things that the planning commission, did during the previous year.
Well, okay, so, I was hoping that the planning commission would have, if someone's gonna draft a report, then the planning commission will schedule it as a business item to just to
At your next
review
meeting?
it and say, yes, we should send it to the board.
Yep, we'll do
Okay.
that.
So if we're clear on the process, and
Okay.
you will arrange for the draft, then I'm good there. All right. Any other opinions related to that, or we're good? Okay. The last item was the master plan review, and it's just come up with some discussions as to what the statutory requirement is for review of a master plan. And I don't think it's to the point where it has to pop up on our agenda in the near term. The copy I have here says it was adopted March 16th, 2009.
Yeah, state law requires that you look at your master plan every 5 years. That's a requirement. You can look at it and say, yeah, everything's fine, we're not gonna make any changes. But you could, obviously, if there are changes that need to be made, that would be the time to do them. So I would suggest that maybe let's get the zoning ordinance done and then start on the master plan process. Because you might want to take a look at your urban service district. That seems to be a hot button issue. You have a new census set out, population changes. And you look at what your existing land uses are and where you anticipate your growth, or is your zoning going along with your master plan, things like that. Are the uses in that
Okay, so
consistent?
when it says you need to review it within 5 years,
Every 5 years.
so does that mean that since this one was March 16th, 2009, that if I start reviewing it on March 15th, 2014, I meet that requirement?
Yes, I can tell you what the minimum that you should do, the absolute minimum, would be to have on your agenda master plan review at some point next year, I suppose, at the 5th year. And at that meeting, you would have everybody have a copy of the master plan, and you would have looked at it. And at some point, if everybody, let's say everybody's comfortable with the plan as it is, no changes are desired. At somebody would make a motion to say, we have reviewed the plan, and after we review, we affirm that the master plan is still current and up to date, and we don't recommend any changes at this time. The motion is passed, it's filed, and the review is over. The requirement is simply every 5 years to take a look at it. And so sometime next year, we should take a look at it, at a minimum. But whether we update it or not will be really what will come out of that conversation.
It would be a result of the review.
Right.
Okay, or the planning commission could decide, independent of working to that deadline at any point, that there was a desire or need to review the master plan and initiate that activity.
Yes.
Okay, so we have lots of time here.
You have to send out notice to the surrounding communities that you're reviewing your master plan.
Okay, well, so there's no way I want to start into this until we finish the zoning limits.
No, you don't want to.
You don't want
Does everybody agree with that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna be done here shortly. That's it for reports and announcements, I believe. And so now it's public comment. Mr. Horton.
I'm not the smartest cat in the room, so what I'm surmising tonight is the general industrial doesn't have any green belts in any space except the front setback and between any other zoning. Is that what I'm to surmise through the chair to Mr. Pennington?
Yes, I would think so. Let's bring the revisions back and make sure we've covered the ground the way we discussed
So
it.
no green belts.
Between the parcels.
Between the
For
parcels.
adjoining industrial parcels.
If I own a piece of property and I want to rent my next door neighbors, different name, I can do that, right?
I don't,
To use for heavy industrial storage.
If the property is zoned industrial.
Okay. That's it.
all right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, that's the end of public comment. So we get to the last item on the agenda tonight, which is adjournment. And I declare we're adjourned at 10:57. Thank you. I was so organized when I got here and stuff.